Colin, you've been wanting to do this since you
Give
had
me my
your old
rose,
haircut.
Matthew. Give me my
Yeah, give me
rose.
my rose. Tell us about it. I wish more people would read this book. It's so good.
You don't have to be a fan of Yoda. You don't have to be a fan of Dooku to get something out of this. It's one of the best looks at the Jedi, outside of like some NJO stuff. Like this is just
Yeah.
peak right here.
I do genuinely believe this book has something to teach everyone. You can learn a lot about life and yourself from this book. And that sounds so grandiose and over the top, but I think it is
No,
true.
that's what literature is.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
Oh
think
yeah,
this is
art
true of
is.
this.
Like
should be.
yeah. This is art. This book is art.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis, Star Wars. I'm Callan, this is Matt,
Hey guys, welcome back.
and this is Evan.
Hello everyone, we have returned.
To the galaxy far, far away after many a long, long year. Matt, what are we discussing today?
I don't know. I felt this was my idea, sort of, kind of mutual decision, but it was based on I felt cold and alone in today's world for some reason. Something just seems horrendously wrong everywhere you look on the globe right now. So, Star Wars was like, I want to go back where it's like comfy and warm or whatever. And so I have just kind of been dipping a toe back into Star Wars very casually for a couple of months. And then the three of us got to talking about covering Dark Rendezvous. What we're going to start off with was so this was geez, I mean, so if we had recorded this a month ago, it would have been the 20-year anniversary of this book's original release day. It came out in on November 23rd of 2004.
Doesn't
Mm.
make us
We're doing
feel
this
old
in
at all.
December of 2024. No, what would?
Well,
Um, but yeah, you reach a weird milestone when like you have firm memories of 20 years ago. Like it
Mm.
wasn't just you and your diaper or whatever, like just hanging around. But so yeah, this is the first time I've read it in about that long. I mean, it's probably been like 17, maybe 16 years since I've done this, and I was blown away by how much I liked it. You know, like I always liked it, but I was blown away by how well it held, how well it holds up. I guess I
mhm.
should say. Um, but before we do all that, Evan, you wanted to talk about how we each came to it. Why don't you start us off on that one, like the original time,
Yeah,
and then we'll get into fresh thoughts.
yeah, no problem, no problem. Well, I mean, I kind of came into this. I think we were kind of discussing this a little bit before we started recording. Matt and I kind of have similar stories on this. This book came out sort of in like the heyday of like the Clone Wars multimedia project. Back in the time period between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, when there was just so much content coming out from various different writers. And I mean, I don't remember like, word for word, what drew me to it, but I was just in the thick of like just my exploration into the expanded universe. And, I saw this novel and, a book really centered around Yoda, especially at the time, was a bit of a rarity. And I think that definitely, just that concept kind of drew me to the overarching idea. And then, Sean Stewart was a writer that I wasn't really familiar with beforehand. So that sort of uniqueness just kind of drew me to it. And yeah, I just picked it up, read it, and just fell in love with it, kind of as we all did. And like you said, going back to it now, as an adult, just from like a writing perspective, I was really blown away by just the feeling of not only how it holds up, but how I can appreciate as an adult the writing style and how it compares to today, which we'll get more into when we get to the specifics. But yeah, as far as introduction goes, it was just like I was in the thick of just the energy of the time and it drew me to it and the uniqueness of it. And yeah, I picked it up and just went from there. So yeah.
Great. You want me to go next, or do you want to take it up, Kellen?
You can go next.
Okay. I was just looking at him, by the way. Sean Stewart's bibliography is depressingly like small. I mean, he's written like
It's
10 or 12
criminal
things,
that he
but
wasn't
it's
He's
more
never
active in
written
the Star
anything
Wars
Star Wars
universe.
related
Yeah,
aside from this.
after this book, he should have been one of the mainstays, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, obviously, he may
yeah,
not have been
he
interested in
he
that, but if he was, he should have been.
so he's only done the one Star Wars thing, but he hasn't written a book period since like 2009, and he's not old. He's like about probably each of our parents' age. He was born in the mid 60s. Um, but yeah, the last thing he worked on looks like it was kind of a trilogy called Kathy something. Everything is Kathy's book, Kathy's key, Kathy's ring. But
Mm,
yeah, he's written like 10 or 12 things overall, but he hasn't written since 2009, according to Wikipedia anyway. But great author, fantastic. I always remembered I picked this book up kind of late in my Star Wars reading, originally. I know I had done Shatterpoint before, um, and
Yeah.
I didn't read that book when it was brand new or anything. You know what I mean? So these books had been around in the world, by that point. I would say that I was already a fan of the expanded universe in the sense that I had definitely played like the KOTOR games, for example. I was definitely aware of a lot of stuff that was going on in the comic books, many of which are actually referenced in this text far more so than they tend to be in other novels, even that were part of the multimedia project. I
Yeah.
mean, he mentions Diesel, for example, like the Deveronian Jedi female dissident who kind of shows up for like maybe like four comics, like total across a couple of different series, including Dark Times.
Hmm.
It's very like, it was referencing stuff that I was like, I know who that is. That's cool. But it
Yeah.
was definitely not something I picked it up kind of by the time I
They
picked it up.
referenced one of the Game Boy games for Pete's sake.
Yeah. Like by the
Did anyone
time
else
I
get
picked it
that?
up, yeah, by
Okay.
the time I was doing it, it was really just about trying to fill in Star Wars gaps. I don't think I went into it expecting much. It turned out to be one of my favorite books then, and I was really kind of terrified that it might have aged like Darth Bane in my mind. But it didn't. It's so so good. I think I like it more now than I did then. Just because I can appreciate the writing craft on a level that I wouldn't have when I first read it when I was like 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there. Um, I think last time I read this, I was sitting in a teacher's classroom for what they then at that time called SSR, like sustained silent reading. I don't have children, so I don't know if they still do that. But there's me dating myself and this book big time. But because I'm in my 30s now.
Hearing
A
that
lot of this
hearing that beat
discussion
Yeah,
is going to be
memory,
that, I
bro,
yeah,
think.
trust me, I
yeah,
missed that. That was
yeah.
good
But
times.
um, but yeah, anyway, I didn't have a special story. I read it because I was a Star Wars nerd going through Star Wars and I liked it. And now I love it. It's so, so
Yeah.
good. I mean, I have to say though, I was going through this thinking this looks like flawless. Like I was gonna have like nothing to say other than it's great. And so at some point, I think it starts showing a few cracks where I
Mm.
can I can have a couple of criticisms going on. Overall, I love it warts and all is what I'm getting at. Amazing book. And if I was to say only read like a few EU books and especially of this period, this would be like one of the top three for sure. Like amazing,
Yeah.
amazing work. Really like it. Callan, you go next.
Like you, I came late to this one. I mean, that's true of pretty much all my Star Wars experiences. I'm very much I've got a quarter of the knowledge and experience that these guys have when it comes to Star Wars as a whole, and that largely comes down to the fact that I didn't experience all the books as a young an age. I had a smattering few, basically at random whenever I've encountered them in the wild. But apart from that, my experience was more the games than the books, and even then, not as much. So I came to this one, I think, probably about 2010 when I was starting to go, oh, yeah, I'm picking up
Mm-hmm.
more bits and pieces of,
Mm.
of the lore, and getting more excited about it and more actively trying to seek them out. And this was one of the main ones for me for that. And I mean, yeah, like you, I was slightly concerned that it wouldn't hold up as well as some of the others haven't. And and yeah, it does. It's definitely top three, possibly the best Star Wars book for me in terms of personal enjoyment. Like I say, it's
Yeah, we'll get
flawed, and
to
we'll get to why in a bit. But it really
yeah.
is
Where we kind of hold it.
definitely top three, possibly number one for me. And regardless of where you place it on an objective scale, absolutely included reading to anyone who needs to get an experience of the EU pre
Yeah.
Legends. If you want to pick up a book and say, here's a quick read for why Star Wars is good, why it's powerful, why it means so much to us, this is it.
I think just to give like the audience like a good like measure, kind of have this book in like our top 10 overall. We just might rank it a little bit differently, I feel.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you want to
Um,
take that as anything, without spoilers, it definitely comes with a strong recommendation from each
I
of
I
us.
I don't have to think about that. It's definitely a top 10 Star Wars book for me. I don't know exactly what there are other books I'd have to think about. This one's an easy two in. But I was gonna say it holds up pretty well in terms of referencing stuff from that particular time when it was the multimedia project and there wasn't an alternate canon like the Clone Wars Cartoon Network show
Mm.
introduced as of like 2008 and onwards, and then continued on once Disney acquired the license and everything. But it holds up pretty well in terms of referencing that stuff without any of that being like I referenced the comics. You do not need to read the comics to know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
It's not like Darth Plagueis or anything that Lucino does, for
You can
example,
get by
which
pretty
is
much just
amazing
on the
that way.
films for this one. This is definitely like
Yeah,
a
just the
single
films.
piece that
Just
holds
the
up by
films.
I
itself,
think,
Yeah.
yeah,
which is
and
definitely a
it's
strength.
I
It
think that really
references
speaks
those things that
to
you can just pick this up. You really can
yeah.
just read this and just put it down. It's contained. It's not overwhelming. It's not. It doesn't suffer from not giving you more context for what it talks about. It's very
Hmm.
clear. And just yeah, like on its own quote unquote objective merit, very well written book with a couple of chinks in the armor. But
Yeah.
in terms of personal enjoyment, it's up there. It's in my top four, easy. Like just all Star Wars, not just Clone Wars, just any Star Wars book for me. It's like it's in the top four easily. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah. But anyway, and I do want to do a list. I want us to do a ranking of our personal. I wanted to mention that before I forgot. At some point, we'll do an
Okay.
episode with
Yeah.
our top each of our top EU books, just to because of invariably people will want that. So it'll be fun to do with you guys anyway. So I'm looking forward to that day
I'm
whenever
all
that
for
comes.
that.
In the
Yeah.
2060s, look for
Hopefully
that,
I
one
was
day.
going
folks.
to
Like
say,
Yeah.
yeah, look for that
look
I
like
think
around.
in a few
yeah.
decades' time,
Well,
based on our Star
for,
Wars
Yeah.
for
pace.
well, that actually kind of gets into like, another main point like about this book that I actually think really, speaks to its credit. Like I sort of describe this as kind of like you could almost see it as like a side quest story with main story stakes. And what I mean by that is in terms of what like just like removing all the like the incredible elements that we love from this book from it just like as a story. Everything that happens in this book in terms of like galaxy-wide impact is actually pretty small. Like this is actually a pretty contained story. In fact, rereading this, I was actually kind of reminded a lot of the Jedi Quest books by Jude Watson, but like in
Hmm.
a good
Hmm.
way, in the sense of it
Yeah.
being a relatively contained story that I mean, theoretically, like you shouldn't skip this, but if you did, you wouldn't be like missing things that like impact the story and like the NJO or stuff like that. But at the
Uh,
same
Um,
time, to its credit, it takes those simple stories and it does it so well that it keeps you coming back. And I actually think, you mentioned, Darth Bane earlier, Matt. That
yeah.
is
Yeah.
definitely a book with galaxy-wide impact, but
Yes.
certain elements of that kind of work against it. Whereas this, I think the reason for all of us that it has such incredible staying power is because it's self-contained and relatively simple that it can really sort of fly by its own merits to the best of its ability.
All the things about this that we love are basically character based rather than plot relevant. So the fact that it is an actual
Yes, it
blip
is
in
a
the
character
world
narrative at
based
its core.
timeline of the franchise doesn't matter. But also, what's interesting about it within the plot space and the relevance to the story is the what if aspect of how much the character discussion and work that goes on in this book ties into what could have been. If this book had gone differently, if the scenes had played out differently, if the character interactions had played differently, this could have been like the fulcrum of the Clone Wars. So considering how little impact it does actually have on the larger world, the what
Mhm.
if impact is pretty significant as well.
Like that also speaks to what I think. Like, yes, you're absolutely right, Callan, in the sense that like if certain things in this book had gone differently, that it could have completely changed the entire saga. But due to the specific structure of it, which I think some people could potentially see as a detriment. Like they kind of like they could say like, oh, it just resets the status quo. I don't think it really comes off that way. I think it really comes off as like this is like the one of just the in a galaxy wide conflict, there's so many things that could happen with these specific characters that it's not just set in stone. Any moment, much like the force itself, things can, change and alter and the river can, break off
Hmm.
into different points. And this is just an example of like this is just how close things were to going completely different. And in many ways, you can almost see that as enhancing the overall narrative of Revenge of the Sith, which obviously this ties directly into. Like this book takes place in 19 BBY, and there are many, story elements to this that clearly are referencing things that are later going to happen in Revenge of the Sith, because this was written as obviously a tie-in to that movie, which was close to coming
Hmm.
out at the time of its release. And there is like, even though, like I said, it is a pretty self-contained in and of itself, there is quite a bit of foreshadowing into things that will eventually lead into Revenge of the Sith in and of itself. But again, it's not like we're saying you don't need to read this to understand what's going on in Revenge of the Sith, but at the same time, like to your point, Callan, the fulcrum of some of the galaxy-wide impacts, things that this does have, do make those scenes hit all the harder, especially for me personally.
So I like the phrase you used about like the status quo. I think what it does is it more kind of reintroduces or reinforces it. Like why is it? You could look at it as just uh, things begin where they ended, but it's a story that comes full circle, and you see a point where a choice was made by a particular character, and they had ample opportunities, and like the choice kept being presented to the character, and to, well, to all the characters had choices to make really, but
Mm.
who I'm really referencing here is Dooku. But
Hmm.
he could have made the choice here. He could have made the choice, but he didn't, and that's why you say, "Oh, pointless story." No, 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 no. The point is that it comes full circle. That's the story. It's about a struggle, and it's about an invitation. It's about an offer that in effect was declined. But we'll get into that later. A couple of things. I'm really glad you mentioned the well, actually, you mentioned the Jedi Quest series. I was thinking Jedi Apprentice, but Jude Watson, uh, author of all but
All
one
of
of those books, or the very first Jedi Apprentice was written by someone else. I want to say, um,
I
uh,
don't apprentice or
yeah,
not.
Jedi Apprentice is the one about Kenobi and Jin, right?
Yes,
Yeah. So give me 1 second.
it was Apprentice, Quest, and then Last of the Jedi. All
Yeah. Yeah, so the very first book of this, like Jedi Apprentice, The Rising Force, the very first one that was written by a guy called Dave Wolverton. The rest of it is all Jude Watson for some reason.
okay,
I'm glad you mentioned her work. I believe it's a woman. But
yeah,
I couldn't swear to that. In my
I
mind, it's
believe
always
so.
been a woman. But
Yeah.
the great thing about that carries forward that we'll pick up on is Jedi Slice of Life. Other than this author, nobody did it better than Jude Watson, in my opinion. And especially considering the age group that she was writing for, which was, like 10 and like younger, amazingly mature and readable and like craving the reading, like craveable reading kind of a stuff.
Mhm.
That I haven't reread all of those books by any means. There's about 19. I do own them all. They're in a box at my dad's place. And that's just that series, I think. I don't know how many Jedi Quest books there are. But those books, when I have dipped back into that cycle of things, they hold up remarkably well as well. But this is
Mhm.
like a heightened version of that. Like Sean Stewart's Jedi Slice of Life stuff is incredible. But also, you had mentioned the fact that the Bane books they have a much more galaxy wide impact than what goes on here. I think that's the thing, and Callan spoke to this before I spoke. Bane books are all plot, 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 and they affect everything, but it's all plot in terms of character. Oh my God, this book and if there are other books that are very good in the Star Wars mythos that and even this era, Clone Wars is good for that kind of stuff. But this book is just so good at making. This is how I want the Jedi to be seen.
Mhm.
If you wanted to get the vibe of the Jedi of what they're supposed to be, it's this book for me. Um, Alan always says things like, "This is what the Jedi are." It's like, yeah, but it's not how they come off because when other writers don't write it, they don't come off quite this way. They're
Mm.
very easily made into boring, not soulless, but certainly kind of cardboard cutout,
Stereotypical.
they,
Mm.
well, archetypal, maybe even like they do things that you're supposed to do because you're supposed to do it. And in this, everybody struggles, everybody's human, everybody has attractions and joys and hates and loves and fears and struggles and doubts. Not just the obviously morally conflicted ones like our Dark Jedi, and technically our Sith, even though to me Dooku's the ultimate Dark Jedi. But not just those are obvious characters like him and Ventress, but the Jedi characters, and not just the young ones, but the fully matured ones, the fully realized ones, they all have, for want of a better term, a human spirit going on. And it's just so good. So anyway, we should probably start talking about what the book is actually
Yeah,
about.
we
Yeah,
haven't
we
actually touched
actually
on
have
the book
a lot
itself,
line. Yeah.
the
but
Well,
the real
the other thing I
what
just
it
want to
really
touch on
is
beforehand, sorry, just before we get to the
sure.
actual book content, is that on top of the fact that it is so well written and creatively uh, genius, this book is also for the right age group, I think, quite transformative. The
Mhm.
inspirational like truths that get threaded into this, both in like actual dialogue as the Jedi and even the Sith in some ways are kind of are verbalizing and explaining, but also in the small moment to moment scenes that we're going to get to touch on in a bit. The the times when certain characters will do certain things, make certain choices, act certain ways, and just do it representing everything they're supposed to be standing for, both as overall characters and within the scenes themselves in the moments. You can learn a lot from this book in a way that it speaks to the strength of Star Wars as a franchise to me. Some of the things that we feel and kind of learn if you're at the right age of the original trilogy, for example, with scenes between Yoda and Luke, it captures the magic of those moments very well. This book, more than any other, I think, in Star Wars terms. At least to memory.
Just in terms of quality, yeah. I mean, I don't want to sound like a snob, but the argument can be made that I am one when it comes to books, and that's okay. Like I'll own that. But so sorry for coming off that way, viewer, if that's the way it sounds. But a lot of Star Wars books, including ones that I cherished and loved growing up, I would not consider like literature. They're more like kind of pop, sort of pulpy. They're fun. A lot of them, a couple of them are might even be a little just bashy and just kind of just fun, kind of B movie grade. This I think comes close to like it's at the threshold of maybe being something that you could consider as part of like a literature or literary canon. It's very, very well written in terms of the I mean, there's some silly, fun stuff that involves like droids and blasters
Yeah.
and
I mean,
violence and all that.
comes with the
But I mean,
territory.
in terms like when you look at it as sort of like character study, and also what it does particularly well is that kind of coming of age-ness of like our young characters of Scout and Wee, for example. Um, it's you could kind of take the Star Wars label off of this and just sell it, and it would still survive on the strength of the writing. You could read this book and as somebody who's never seen a Star Wars movie, I think and still like it, and that's I think extraordinarily rare when it comes to any of these. You know, I don't know that you could do that. Maybe you could do it with Thrawn, maybe, but you'd really need an imagination to be able to picture what's going on there. This one, I pretty much think you could be new to the English language. You could never have seen a Star Wars like book and just have an interest in reading. I think you could throw together an idea of what this is and just grow to like it. Um, but anyway, what the book is actually about is
The book
the long and
itself.
short of it. What's really about, if you want to distill it down, is Dooku. And I love the phrase "he thinks he's lying," but we'll get to that.
Oh.
Dooku wants to kind of entrap Yoda, or does he want to ask for an invitation to rejoin the Jedi? Is it a trap? Is it an honest ask? He thinks
He
he's
doesn't
lying.
know.
But anyway,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
So
in
it's
fact, it's
kind
better
of
than that. It's not just he doesn't know; he thinks he knows, and he's
he
wrong.
thinks
That's the
yeah.
beauty of
So
it, like you say.
it's
It's
he's
a literal
harboring doubt.
rendezvous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's harboring doubts about not really just the past, but really the great thing is like the present. It's like, okay, so this is what the galaxy is. This is what I've made it. This is what my relationship is to my student and my teacher, my new teacher, my Sith teacher. Um, is there still a place for me at the Jedi Temple? Like, because a long time ago, in this galaxy, not a galaxy far away, uh, my first mentor told me something. He's like, was that true? Was it true? You know what I mean? Is he going to be there for me when I fall? You know, it's like it's such a great opening sort of like mission statement. I don't know who came up with the plot of the book. I don't know if that was all Sean Stewart's idea, or if they said, hey, here's a concept of a Yoda plan for Dooku, write the book around it. But it's basically an offer, a question basically arrives at the Jedi Temple from Dooku, and I come back. And all throughout, he's not quite sure whether he means it or not. So that's what the book is about. Um, you could say it's about Yoda. It's more about their relationship. It's more if it's about anyone, it's about Dooku. I would say if it's about one character, it's more him because Yoda is who he is. Yoda is a mentor. He's fully formed. Um, but at the same time, he grows and changes a bit as this book goes on, but he really is who he is. And then, there's the characters of Scout and we who are our young Jedi who are in one case at least experiencing a brand new forged Padawan Jedi Knight sort of master apprentice relationship in the form of Scout. We'll get into the details of that. And we already has a Jedi master at the time. But they're kind of the characters who are literally sort of just along for the ride, but it's equal parts their journey. But in terms of like why they're there, kind of just because this author came up with them and they're awesome. You know what I mean? Like I don't really feel like they
Yeah.
needed to be a part of
The
this. I mean, it's like it's kind of it's a funny thing.
yeah.
Dooku's
There would be no
Dooku's
story if
story
not for.
Yeah. Dooku's story, their book, Yoda's title. To your point, one of the biggest actually themes in this book is like age and generations and learning. So what I will say that, when it comes to all the characters in this book, we actually have like representations from like every like age group in a lot of ways. Like you
Mhm.
have the Jedi
Mm.
apprentices, you have Asajj Ventress, who's like, about roughly like Anakin and Obi-Wan's age group. Then you have their older Jedi masters. Then you have Dooku, who's even older than that, and then obviously Yoda, who transcends all of that. So it kind of goes back and forth, and that's the thing too, because like in the generations in and of themselves too are like very much, I wouldn't say sectioned off, but they do very much have their own story. Like Scout and we have their interactions with Ventress. Dooku obviously has his interactions with Yoda. Anakin and Obi-Wan aren't really in this very much, but they are obviously together the
They're
whole time that they
contractually
are.
obliged
Yeah,
to be here, and that's the only reason they're here.
yeah.
Yeah,
I was gonna,
yeah,
yeah,
one of the which
One of
can
the
be said,
one of the
which honestly
weaknesses of the
can be
book, but
said
that's
like
not
one
the
of
author's
the
fault.
yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's one of the very few criticisms I think I have of this book, which we will get to. But and then obviously you have the masters,
Max
uh,
Leem and Jai Marek.
Maxine and
Yeah,
Chimeric, yeah, who are like,
yeah,
kind of they're quite literally the in-between generation between like
yeah.
the younger and the
Well,
ancient, so
They're
to
also
speak, which is
reflections of the
it's
two different perspectives of the Jedi as well, even within their own generation.
yes.
Because I completely agree, this is generationally a strong book. It's one of the reasons I love it so much, because I'm a big fan of that in literature. The fact that you can come to this from different age groups, as people in fact do, as fans, having read it you're young and then reading like us growing up, you get to enjoy the different textures at the different ages all throughout. But also within those two themselves, they're reflections of the different perspectives of the Jedi too. Like, you've got the one,
Hmm.
the more passive, the more learned, the more calm in Max Leem, and then you've got the more of the warrior type in Marek. So it works
Yeah.
very well there.
yeah, it's interesting you pointed that out because the author I think is probably pushing about 60 or so as of the time of this recording, but when he would have written this, he would have been like 40. So it's
Mm.
pretty much smack in the middle of like of everything, like perfectly like middle-aged kind of. He's old enough then completely remember and appreciate what it is to be truly young, like Scout and we, and to have done trials of the kind that Obi-Wan, Anakin, Max Leem, and Jai Mark have been through, and to also kind of have things like Dooku's age on the horizon. It's nowhere close, but you can begin to understand what life will be like maybe once you start reaching that point in your life. And they talk about relative age, like Dooku's old, but not in the way that Yoda is, and
Mm.
they speak. The book speaks to that because Dooku talks about he's far older than Ventress is, but for example, but he's there's like a little boy inside of him that still wants
Mm.
Yoda, and he's like in his 80s. It's very very it's just great. I do think the author drastically kind of thinks that what's the word? He sort of underestimates Mace's age. I think he said that there was like a 5 year age gap or so. There was a comment made by Max Leem actually, where she made it sound like Qui-Gon was significantly older than him or than her. Because like Qui-Gon had been nice to her when she was like a
Mm.
young pupil in the temple. Qui-Gon and Mace are pretty much the same age, and then there's a comment made where it feels like he thinks that Mace is super young. I don't know if it's maybe just because like Sam Jackson looks good for his age or something, but
Well,
he seems to think Mace is in his 30s or something. Mace is not.
well,
Mace is like
that's the
50.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, the thing with Qui-Gon's age has always been kind of a weird sort of like continuity.
Fluctuating.
Like I don't know if I'd call it
he
like a flaw necessarily, but
it's
it's
not
like
a it's not a continuity error. It's just people don't think he's 60 because Liam Neeson was
right.
like 40 when he
Mm.
was cast. But he's a little bit in canon, and this is without any I don't know if they've changed stuff in recent editions of this or that, but in the version of the expanded universe timeline that I'm familiar with, that we're familiar with,
Mhm.
that we grew up with, uh Qui-Gon was born the exact same year as Kiadi-Mundi and Tal. They all were born the exact same year, which I think was 92 BBY. Super nerd point if that's true, but I think that that's
I was
true.
going to say,
Um,
pull your glass
but
at your nose at that point.
yeah, yeah, but I also think that like oh yeah, maybe I'm talking myself in a
Well,
circle.
Dooku
Yeah,
was
like
102,
yeah,
so
that
yeah,
was
that
the weird thing. That's the weird thing because there's only a 10-year gap between Dooku and Qui-Gon, but it was consistent. It was consistently weird. Like that was the thing that was said. But yeah,
yeah.
Mace is younger than Qui-Gon, but he's not a young man, you know. So and Max Liam doesn't come off as super young either. But so
Mm.
there was that one slight thing where I think he forgot how old he was trying to make her. But it's very, very good. Like I mean, this whole pan generational thing that we're talking
I
about,
I like as
I
well,
love
in
it.
particular, how it plugs not just in terms of the character moments and interactions, but how it plugs directly into the philosophy of the Jedi as well. It's very easy when you're talking about this kind of material to just get very aloof and up in the pie in the sky,
Hmm.
and not, basically detached from what's going on.
Mhm.
He masterfully connects
Well, the book
the
is an
the
indictment on that. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
exactly,
It bring
exactly, the
it
whole
calls all
mission
that into
statement.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only is it
Mhm.
explaining that explicitly, but implicitly in all of the actions, the ruminating on past experiences, ruminating on the youth, the questioning oneself as to how they're, how they're looking back in the past. Am I looking back on this accurately? Should I be looking back at all? All of these questions are being plugged directly into what we're seeing on
Mhm.
page in the scenes, while also examining the kind of meta layer of life philosophy that you can take forward in
Yeah.
your actual lives. It's beautifully crafted for that. Probably the
Yeah,
biggest
I
Well, it's
think
also,
strength of the book for
yeah,
me.
if
but
I could just dovetail on the
yeah,
word
for sure.
philosophy, and I think
Mm.
it does that really, really well without dipping into like just a pretentious mess. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
exactly. It
It's
keeps it
very,
grounded
very,
and rooted
very,
in that
yeah,
character work.
Yes.
That's the thing I love
Well,
most,
yeah,
more than anything else. I mean, give,
absolutely.
give me
yeah.
my rose. The
Yeah.
Mhm.
whole book is
But I mean, it
that for
begins
me.
with that. It begins with the shell. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So it
and
begins with
and
that. Like
and
the
hammered in with the
conversations complete
return
each other.
candle in
But
terms of literary
yeah.
craftsmanship. The fact that they don't address what the message is until the very end when he holds up that candle.
Hmm.
It's this man just knows what he's doing.
Something I think that he also does better than I think honestly most writers in Star Wars when it comes to things like age and just the depth of experience, as I like to sort of use it, particularly in the case of Yoda. And just to kind of like put that in perspective of like what these characters have been through. Like I'm going to use Yoda and Dooku as an example. Dooku in this book is 83. So let's think
Hmm.
about like where we are right now. Like 83 years ago from now, that's like World War II. A very
Hmm.
different age than where we are now, obviously. But if you were to like time travel back then, you could still there are still things that kind of carry over to our modern world. Like you could go back then and have like a conversation with somebody about like I don't know like baseball or something like
Kind
something like
of,
that. You can, like
kind of
relate.
when our modernity was born, if you want to think
Yeah.
about it that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can relate to on a certain level. Now compare that to Yoda. Yoda is almost 900.
Hmm.
900 years ago from now was like the Crusades. Like that's a completely like you can't go back then and talk about baseball. Like it's a very different like thing. Like imagine if someone was alive during the Crusades and was still alive now. Like the amount of things that they have witnessed and how much the world has changed and how much that they have
I
gone
feel.
and how it has
I,
colored like their
And
experiences and the depth of that knowledge really comes to the forefront because it really like you may think you can imagine that but you really can't. Like it's something that we
mm,
as humans can't really comprehend because I mean again like Dooku 83 for us is like old. Like a lot of people unfortunately don't even really live past that, and then you have something like Yoda which is just so I mean, there's no other word to describe it, alien compared to
mhm.
what we as humans can comprehend. And I don't know if this is intentional, but as most of the cast in this book are human. Yoda is one of the very few non-humans, and I think when you add in the elements of age and how much he has experienced and how much that has broadened him compared to everyone else. Again, I don't know if that's intentional, but it really does come off extremely well because at the end of the day, you can't really comprehend what he has seen. He understands that not everyone else does, and that just adds to the just incredible depth of wisdom in how he comes off and how he is written. And again, it goes all the way back to Empire Strikes Back in the sense of like, you from Luke's perspective, this is a being unlike anything he has ever experienced before, and that comes off beautifully in this work as well.
it's particularly amusing and enjoyable as well because of the fact that Star Wars universe doesn't change. 1,000 years ago,
I
it
was
was
gonna
basically
say,
the
I knew
same
you were
thing.
gonna say that.
but
Yeah, yeah.
but that
I knew you
doesn't
was
but
gonna say
doesn't
that.
kind of
Yeah,
get anything you're saying because everything you're saying is completely correct. When you come bringing it from the
yeah, I
outside
completely
perspective,
agree.
looking
Yeah.
into the world, it doesn't damage the story at all. One, it doesn't matter anyway. But even if it did matter, he sidesteps the issue because he's talking about it in the context of the story and the characters. He's talking about it in terms of their perceptions. They're looking at Yoda and thinking, "You're clearly detached. You're 900 years old. You've seen 1,000 corpses, in your time. Who cares? And it addresses the fact that that does not matter. The detachment it's not a lie. Just the complexity of detachment as a concept and how it ties to the Jedi, and how it ties to people in real life as well. It is so thoroughly explored in this, and how it connects to their overall philosophies in terms of how it connects to their life experience and their personal choices from day to day. It encapsulates and captures everything you're talking about there, Evan, without having to worry about the weirdness of Star Wars never actually really changing. It's the strength of the book as a whole. It plays within the world and plays within the setting and the characters perfectly.
Just being human. I mean, just because you've been around a very long time and you've seen so much doesn't mean that you can't relate to somebody or relate to experiences of the day to day. And I think that's something that I think everyone experiences at some point in their life.
When it comes to Star Wars, human is basically a stand-in for sentient for most of the time. You know what I mean? Ventress technically is not a human. She may as well be. You know what I mean? I think he does a really good. The only really like alien person here, other than Yoda, that's prominent is MacLeod. But
MacLeod.
uh,
A grand Jedi, which is quite rare, actually. Interestingly enough.
but she, I mean, I think it was like a resounding success, and that the grand nature is perfectly expressed by her presence, and at the same time, she's just a person. You know what I mean? So, which is, I think, a great way of bridging this. Whether it was intentional to make pretty much the rest of the cast human, I don't know. But it certainly highlights, like what they all have the same thoughts when they're looking at Yoda, and he sort of doles out this all throughout, but really at the end of the book, Yoda calls out the fact that, like, if anything, I'm more impacted by some of this stuff. It's like I've watched entire generations like fade away from me, like pulled away from me. He mentions having, more, like sort of loves and desires, but he hates. He talks about hates. That he's had hatreds, he's had hates, throughout his life. He's had to let go of those things too. It's like it's not that they don't happen; they happen. And when you live that long, you have the opportunity for so much loss, and also to make many mistakes. One of the key early quotes in the book, like know what one such as Yoda, so old as Yoda, has time for, or in a life so old or something. I can't do the quote because it's Yoda speak, and they're like, "What? Many mistakes?" It's like it's a really, really, really like okay. This guy understands. Like you said, a human can't really comprehend what it is. What is it to be 900? But you can comprehend what it is to be like in the abstract so far old, like what would that be like? And if anything, you see that there are times when it compounds on Yoda. So if anything, it's more painful to him, or could be, almost even should be, if he wasn't such a great person, great Jedi, but really just great person. I want to highlight that. It's like there's a difference between being a powerful Jedi and being just a good person,
Yeah,
which is the great thing here.
He does such a good job of taking these ideas and these concepts and playing with them at the different levels you can, like the personal, the psychological, the philosophical. It's a full experience as you read this. You're getting this, whatever your personal lived experience in life, whether you lean towards the human and grounded, whether you like to dive into the concepts of philosophy and thinking about ideas and playing with them. He gives you the full smorgasbord, basically, of options as to how you would like to approach this. And not just purely literarily for the sake of relating to readers, but also through the lenses of the characters he's chosen to portray. The young characters, the young optimists versus the young realists, the middle-aged characters, the warrior and the philosopher and the teacher, the elderly and then the very elderly in Yoda, in terms of I have fallen, I have yet to, but every day I could easily could. He's approaching this from all of these levels, and the whole story is channeled through the exploration of these different ideas at that level. It's so enjoyable.
What you're talking about, what you're talking about is really because like so much of Star Wars, particularly a lot of Star Wars is just good versus evil. And people like to say things like bounty hunters or smugglers are kind of a gray area, and yeah, sure, sort of. But usually, a good smuggler is a good person, and a bad bounty hunter is a bad bounty hunter. You can mix and match or whatever. A lot of the stuff, including the Jedi and the Sith, is good versus evil. This is this certainly involves the dark side and its conflict with the light. Certainly that's a part of it. But really what this is people comparing themselves to other people. Like that's what it is. It's comparing, am I not as good as him, whether that's Scout or we.
Mm.
whether that's Dooku and the Jedi as an abstract, the other Jedi, because he was a star pupil, but never feels as loved, never feels, and kind of can sense that he had a harder time as a student for this reason, because he didn't struggle with the technique of everything. Very effortless for him. Actual person though, major struggles. You know what I mean? Very imbalanced, lifelong. And you could certainly argue he never really was on the ball, especially if you're taking other like work into consideration. But I think this book pretty well tells that. You kind of have that at the door of your imagination. Like, yeah, this guy wasn't ever really, he was never Max Leem, for
Mm.
example. You know what I mean? He always had this otherness to him in terms of his Jedi-dom. But it's every character's doing it. Jai does it. You know,
Mm.
he's a full on, like looking at him, he just looks like a Jedi. He's like Obi-Wan or something, full grown Jedi, fully fledged Jedi. He's got doubts, he's got questions. There's like this sort of quasi question is less, am I a good Jedi? Less light side versus dark side. Am I a good parent?
Mm.
Am I a good role model? Am I a
Right.
good student? Those things. That's why the book is so good, and that's what you were talking to or
And it's so
speaking to, Kellen.
consistent as well. We'll talk
Yeah.
about where the plot kind of dips in peaks and valleys a little bit. The through lines at the plot level for how the characters connect to the overall story,
Hmm.
from that way, that's a little bit touch and go and a bit flawed. But from the character through lines, every single scene but with these characters is highlighting one or more of the different concepts and ideas that are being played with throughout. That sheer comparison thing, where am I as good as this person? That happens beat for beat throughout the entirety of the book. And again, approach from every different possible angle. He uses
Yeah.
every moment and squeezes all those creative juices to the fullest every time, and it
So
never gets old.
Yeah.
why don't
Which
we
kind of
why don't we why don't we couch the initial part in like the early goings on at the temple, because everyone's kind of there that's
Yeah,
relevant, and then from there we can kind of do a
temple
character.
travel
We'll
and
just talk
then
about each
finale.
character. You know.
Yeah.
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 So
Because
so early book at the temple. Evan, why don't you kick us off? We'll dive into that.
yeah. Well, we've already kind of touched on this. Dooku, setting this trap for Yoda. Um, sends a message, to the Grand Master. That's when we're introduced to characters like Max Lean and Jai Merrick, because Merrick is the one who actually he escaped a confrontation with Asajj Ventress, who has a
I
pretty
was gonna
yeah
say
yeah
escaped. Was
yeah
allowed to.
Ventress actually has a pretty quite a substantial role in this
She's
book
great
too.
in this. Yeah, by
Yeah,
the way, like
Very good.
by far the most interesting she ever
fantastic.
was. But yeah,
Yeah,
anyway, as you were saying.
and he's the one who delivers the message to Yoda, along with the shell, which we have mentioned. This leads into the introduction of the rest of the cast. Max Lean, Scout, and which also we actually get a reprise. Speaking of Jude Watson, we get a reprise of the apprentice tournament. Seen
Yeah.
prominently
Hmm.
in those books, because the big thing is that again, like Matt mentioned, we does have a master, Max Lean, but Scout does not, and that is because she herself is someone who very much struggles with the Jedi arts, and it is the apprentice tournament where we basically get introduced to how she overcomes those struggles, which eventually gets her the attention of Yoda, and then Jai Merrick, who eventually takes up his position as her
Hmm.
teacher. So basically, this first half is a lot of here's the setup, here's the characters, here's some interactions within the Jedi Temple, very slice of life Jedi. Like I said, the apprentice tournament. We get to see the temple cafeteria, which very rarely
Yeah.
gets shown actually.
Yeah.
And we actually, I do like how they sort of weave in character moments to the food. Actually, that's a weirdly
Yes. Yes.
prominent theme
Yeah.
in this
It
book,
is.
how food can represent the characters, which again is very unique. And then we
Yeah.
also get introduction to what's the droid's name off the top of my head? Fidelis, very
Fidelis.
briefly,
Solus
who's
and
actually,
Fidelis,
yeah,
yeah.
who's
Um.
actually spying on the Jedi Temple. We don't know why yet, but that gets revealed in
Yeah.
Act Two, and eventually this sort of culminates in them eventually leaving to go meet with Dooku on Vjun. And I'm sure anyone who's played the Dark Forces games or read the Dark Empire comics knows all about that planet. We actually learn Vjun's backstory in this book in and of itself, which I again will get to more in a bit. But
Yeah.
that's the
We'll get
basics.
into that. Um.
Dooku sends a message through Jai Merrick, and that's where we get our introduction to the characters
And it
of
tells
that.
you a lot
Yes.
about how
And
much of a
at this
character
point,
piece this book is when you can summarize what amounts to almost a full third of the plot in they're in the temple, they get a message, they
Few
leave on the
minutes,
mission.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
Yeah.
I'd like to know.
they're really spending the time on introducing us to these characters and layering in those early character concepts and
Yeah,
their struggles, their personal choices, their
Because they
different
use
connect.
the tournament as a means of like introducing their skill sets of the
Yes,
apprentices and how
yes,
each of them
yeah.
overcome, which of then of course
I,
weaves into their character too.
yeah.
I'd also like to take the moment before we get to the actual goings on of the tournament itself, which is a quite hefty part of the book. Like that's
Mm,
and that's not a complaint. It's one of the star set pieces. It's by design. It's supposed to be. But we spend
Hmm.
a lot of time with that. So we'll talk about the intricacies of that in a minute. I would really like to back up to the point where John Merrick brings the message to the Jedi, and we get our introduction to Scout there. I thought that was immaculately done, and I kind of
mm,
forgotten how brilliant that was. When I think back of my almost 20-year-old memories of this book, like 17 year old memories of first time reading, what sticks out in my mind was, oh, I remember the apprentice tournament, the Padawan, sort of like tryouts kind of a thing. I remember that. That was really great. I remembered the whole Dooku Yoda relationship and the philosophy kind of angle there. I remember that Obi-Wan and Anakin are in it and they should not be. Those are the things I remembered, right?
mm.
I forgot how perfectly done and how sort of cute and honest and just like instantly sympathetic like Scout's initial scene is like just and just like the honesty of it, even the harsh things that are said about it are not, they're not cruel. It's just there's such a sincerity to this writing. It's sort of like, and just like Mace, who this book is 100% not about, has that great sense of character of just like, Scout, get out of here, like kind of a
Yeah.
thing, like I know you're
Hmm.
here, get out. And you have Yoda clearly like, wondering about this girl's future and the other Jedi's takes on it. They're like, do you think she should be sent away to work the agricultural corps? And they're like, yeah, actually. I
The
mean, it's
qu-
kind of cruel to have her be here,
the question of the two
Go ahead,
kinds
And then
of
you
Peter.
have her
kindnesses as
listening
well.
listening in to the by the door, an Iron
Yeah,
Hand using
Iron Hands who
telekinesis
knows
to
her
tap it, so
best.
she runs away from it.
and,
Again,
and,
like
and he
Yeah.
makes
classic
these
like
choices. Iron Hands
teenager
known,
listening in trope.
yeah, Iron Hands knows her best, and he's trying to establish that early with wait, send her off, establish that connection, the fact that they are the most familiar of the two of this group. Like little tiny little details like that that really hold all this together. Um,
And it's
and
also
as the question
you
as well
don't
of the two kindnesses, is it better to let her live her dream
yeah.
despite the risks, or is it better to try and push her into the agricultural corps where she will be safest, and then therefore cut her off at the
Hmm.
knees? That
Which
just a
is
simple little
yeah.
spin on another question that gets added into the massive pile of things that get dealt with in this book on a character level.
Well, I
But I
wanted
love
to
how
ask
also they frame it specifically like neither is necessarily a horrible option in and of itself. They don't set it, at least to me, it doesn't come off as like, one option, one or the other. It's like they try and
Mm.
establish like, yes, this would be better for her safety, but at the same time, she puts in so much determination and work into her Jedi studies that you could clearly tell that she would give being a Jedi everything she has. So it's very much set up like it's not necessarily, obviously big decisions, but not ones where you can necessarily see her not excelling in either of them,
She'd be among the
which
yeah,
best
I
of
mean,
them,
well,
and they
which
discussed that.
actually
And
kind of leads to a broader discussion of anyone who knows what happened to her story
I,
after this book, but that's
I think Matt wanted to
very
ask us.
different.
Are you going to ask us to say which we would choose, Matt? Was
I
that
had a
correct?
follow-up comment, but I'll save it to that. Why don't we do that question since it's relevant right now?
Do you
Which
guys know? I hadn't particularly thought about it, to be honest.
I mean, it's
I
also
mean,
funny. I think Kinds of Kindness is the name of a show or movie that's out right now. But
Oh, is it?
like
I
which
didn't
kind
know
of kindness? Yeah, I
that.
think so. But it's like when it comes to the right or wrong here, I think that there isn't one, and I think
Mm,
that that's why this is a wager between Jai Merrick and Yoda.
yes.
That's that Jai doesn't have a choice in whether or not he's going to accept. I mean, Yoda very much grandmasters his way into that
When the
arrange very
Grandmaster
much. But
asks for you to sit with them and eat, as it comes up
yeah,
later in the story, you do it.
but but what I was actually going to say was because that's my answer to it is that give her more time, let her prove herself. Let's see what we
Mm,
what are we looking at here. It's not right or wrong to just because nobody's that dismissive of her. You know what I mean? And this is what I'm getting at the follow up comment. I love that conversation because Yoda is listening to what they're saying. He's not shutting them down and saying no, you're wrong. He's not saying you guys are cruel because they're not. He's not saying you guys have no point because they do. He's saying He's asking questions. He's doing what a
Mm.
good teacher does. He's
Mhm.
I think he's helping himself even arrive at the correct answer. It's not like he just sees it. He's taking in what they're saying. Iron Hand
Mhm.
knows her best. Her comments mean a lot. Maze's perspective means a lot because he knows who she is. He also knows where she ranks in terms of her power. I can't remember
He's
which
the most
of them
attached
actually
and just
says,
second in command anyway, so it's a logical kind
yeah,
of middle
but
ground between the two.
I think the actual line when Yoda poses the question, "Do you think she should be sent to the agricultural corps?" I can't remember whether that's Mace or Merrick. It might be Merrick though, but he's the one who ends up letting her. So whichever way, it's fitting. Um, but I really like the fact that Yoda points out what I already mentioned at least a little bit in passing is that there's a very great difference between being a good person or a good Jedi and a powerful one because
Mm.
she's weak in terms of force strength. Like that's she's objectively just weaker than most of them are. But that's got
Right.
nothing to do with whether you're a good Jedi or not, because he points out if these things are the only things that matter, we'd be looking to our star pupil, we'd be looking to Dooku. You
Mm.
know, it's like when he talks about our great student, he's talking about himself. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's almost like he's almost blaming himself, kind of a thing. Like in terms of Dooku's fall, he's like, was maybe I'm a bad teacher, and it doesn't matter if they come with all the parts fully formed, like telekinetically gifted, perfect lightsaber master, perfectly studious and knows what he's talking about in terms of like the history and the codes and the diplomacy and all the rest of that.
Even the
It can
wisdom to a
still
certain
go very
level.
badly wrong. Yeah, even the wisdom to a certain level, yeah. But it's like that those things are not all of what a Jedi is, and Yoda sees that very well. It's also a lot of what they're talking about, it's also worth noting that the conversation is coming during a time of war. They're not just having
Mm.
this as of like pre the Phantom Menace. It's like, we just give her the boot because she sucks. It is, are we sending her into battle, with like a master who,
Mhm.
it's not fair to either
Yeah,
party? Like
exactly.
is
Not
that
just
what we're
to her,
saying,
but the master that's to look after her. Exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah,
Maxime offers that perspective a lot as well. They're moving throughout the rest of the
yeah.
book. The fact that this is a time of war, that this is a time that's changed. These new children are being raised on battle tactics and war philosophy rather than the peaceful ways that the Jedi are supposed to represent, etc. This
Yeah.
scene in particular. One of my critiques of the overall book is that the kind of through line connections in the plot and the way the story develops isn't entirely tethered as firmly as it could be for its entirety. There's breaks in the line, as it were, at certain points, particularly at the tail end. One of the things
Yeah.
this is an exception to that, because this perfectly introduces Scout and Telesbeth N1 Nung Esterhazy as her full name in the very start of the book. So you've set up the expectations of the reader, so it's her being present throughout as a main lead. It's done it in the context of exploring the philosophy and the character of the Jedi that this book is going to. It's basically the mission statement of this book as a whole for the Order. But then more on a personal level, more specifically towards the characters it's exploring with Yoda and Dooku. The whole conversation, as you said, Matt, leads to the point of Dooku being the kind of the full stop at the end. That this is Dooku is the greatest of all of these. He would be. Narratively speaking, that is genius. That it's purely
Yeah.
encapsulated in that scene, the expectation of the reader for what the rest of the book is to come. That is so clever, and
Mhm.
I cannot harp on the genius of this guy enough for how he does that at various points throughout the story. With a
Can
little
I,
bit of an exception
can I
towards
as
the end that we'll get to, but I
I was
love
gonna
it.
say as a quick side piece, I don't have any problems with this book until like we're like two-thirds in.
Yeah,
And up until that
likewise,
point, I
Mhm.
think it's like a flawless book.
likewise.
And again, we'll talk about the criticisms in more detail a bit later. It's not time for those, but I feel that this book desperately wants to be longer than it
Mm,
is, or like it wants to be book one in a
yes.
short series. Like what?
Yeah.
Because I feel in my mind, like I already said, I always remembered Obi-Wan and Anakin are both in this, and I wish they weren't. And now that I look at it, I actually don't mind what they represent or what they do or anything they say. If anything, I would just want more of them in the book to make it make sense.
Exactly. It's the connective
And
tissue at the
for that, the
tail
book
end that
needs to
doesn't
be
thread through
longer.
the beginning. Yeah, there's no
Mhm.
Yeah,
expectation set up
yeah,
at the start of this that allows them to be part of the story
and
in this level
and
they are.
it's and to speak to what you're getting at, they're not the only issue by any means, but every problem I think with it is in that vein. If the
Yeah.
book was longer or told over a series, like a maybe not a trilogy, although it very easily could be, but at least a duology. I feel the
Mm.
book at least wants a second book, and it wasn't able to be that. So I think that that's why it kind of, I won't say falls apart by the end, but if I have any criticisms, they're all in the back like the back end.
Completely agreed.
Early
Completely
on,
agreed.
fantastic.
And even in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
vein, that particular example of the Obi-Wan Anakin aspect, that it could have been, if you had to fix it in one book and you had maybe given more time or less editorial mandate or contractual obligation to involve the two in the first place, whatever it is. I mean, if you just had it so that you could relayer a bit more of the interference angle, because they are only involved because Sidious is tweaking things behind the
Yeah.
scenes, and that it does a good job of establishing their entry point as, oh, well, we'll just send them along to fuck this up, please. That's set up at the ahead of it, but we don't get, and it doesn't lean in enough to that that angle of things to make it truly feel like it's a tangible part of the story and not just something that's tagged on as that kind of, well, we've got to wrap this up situation. That could had more life breathed into it.
I completely agree with that criticism there, but can we, or that commentary that you just made, can we use that as a bridging point to pause the Jedi thing then and talk about the Dooku? Because you mentioned like Sidious wanting to talk about like what's this in to sprinkle a little fuck up into it. I love the way you phrased it. Right? Like let's establish for the viewers, like, what is Sidious receiving here? Like, what is he fucking up? Let's talk about that mechanism in the plot. So uh again, we'll it'll get back to the Jedi because it's a Jedi book, but really Dooku's doubts and Dooku's questions. I'd really like us to have a conversation about, well, the conversation between him and Ventress early on. That scene, I mean, I can't pick a favorite scene in this book.
It's
I mean,
all so good.
probably
it's all so good.
Because I think of I think of the Rose stuff at the end, but then I think that's got nothing to do with Wee and Scout, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
And then I think about like Ventress's stuff is
It
really
says a
good.
lot
You know,
that we
it's like
actually can't narrow down what our favorite sequence is because it has so many.
this is a contender though, where he's talking to Ventress. I'd like us to talk about that now before we jump back into the temple side of things.
Right.
Evan, why don't you you're good at this kind of a thing. Help us just a thread sort of a threadbare accounting of what's happening here. What's the scene?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this basically establishes like the basic premise of like not only how Chimeric got away from Ventress, but also what the point is in the sense of like, Dooku wanting to use this as like he literally says like a hook to lure the Grand Master to him because it's all set on a plan to ensnare Yoda. And in this sequence, we get quite a bit of context for not only Ventress's position in the war, but also her relationship to Dooku, her wanting to be his, because it's pretty firmly established, not only in other works, but in this one as well, that although, Dooku has obviously trained her extensively, he hasn't really taken her into the full Sith fold, so to speak, at least in the sense of what she wants. That, of course, eventually leads into a dialogue between them where again, going back to the themes of age, Dooku brings up, are you sure you're ready? Because, as Sith, if I give you this, you'll obviously betray me. Why throw your life away? And she wants more than what she has, but she still has loyalty to him. That sort of tension, obviously, eventually leads into a conversation. And it's really smart how they do this, how they juxtapose Ventress' interaction with Dooku, which then leads into Dooku's interaction with Sidious, obviously the generation in the hierarchy, even though Dooku's actually older than Sidious, but we won't.
It's always a little bit weird.
We won't touch on that. That's not relevant right here. But
you know what? That doesn't matter. That don't matter. That goes back to the beginning of the line. Like Darth Bane considered taking Qasim, see him as his Padawan or as his apprentice when he was like, maybe I could turn him into he's already got the lightsaber stuff down. He just needs to get the philosophy. It doesn't matter. Like, it's weird, but it doesn't matter. It does make sense though.
Yeah.
No,
but anyway.
But It's very smart how they do this because you immediately start off with Dooku in a position of authority over Ventress, then immediate supplication into Sidious, and that's where you see the doubts because you
Yeah.
can see him, and it's also smart how they do this because you can clearly see that Sidious is picking up on these doubts,
Yes.
and he
Yes.
even
Yeah.
voices like, oh, I was all, when I chose you, I was skeptical that someone like you can, you know, um, you know work under,
Wear a leash, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
essentially, yes. And that sort of leads to like this is the beginning essentially of Dooku's internal struggle where
Yeah.
the presentation, like it's kind of like, his mouth is doing one thing but his head's doing another
Yeah.
because
That's
it
that's such
goes
a
back.
great
Brilliant,
thing throughout the
brilliant way of
entire book.
putting.
That's such a
Yeah.
great
Yes.
thing throughout the entire book. Yeah.
And that's sort of the impetus of this whole thing because he's presenting this idea to his master. It's like, it's not that I have doubts, it's that no, I'm going to use this as a hook. And you could just tell from the jump that Sidious can see, well, not to put it too fine a point on it, but he can sense the conflict within Dooku.
Yeah.
And this, of course, touches on, the overarching philosophy of the Sith hierarchy in this time and the sort of dynamic. And Sidious's sort of viewing of Dooku, not only as his apprentice, but also, whether or not he is someone who he can control, which obviously, again, this is all set up for things that are going to be happening in Revenge of the Sith. So basically what we get,
So
this is basically like a microcosm of like, the Sith characters of this era
yeah.
right
It's
now.
it's
And this
it's
is
so
this
much.
setup
We talk.
for,
Sorry,
yeah.
sorry. Just on that point you mentioned, because we talked so much about how the Jedi and the teachers and the students are both learning from each other, and it's a two-way street, and that's a big message on the Jedi side of the story. This scene and others to come later fully encapsulates that and truncates it down to a much smaller piece for the Sith side as well,
Mhm.
because Dooku is trying to justify, even in real, laying down the tracks ahead of the train in real time. Yeah, why did I let this hook? Trying to explain it to Ventress and bat down, bop her on the nose for her own aspirations, and all of that is then immediately
But he
flipped
can't
and
do that to
reversed back to
Sidious.
him. Exactly,
Yeah.
Sidious is then doing exactly straight back to him, and she points this out later. She it comes back in later scenes. She's saying everything you've made clear to me, he clearly makes clear to you. You know this, right? You understand that everything you're telling me applies to you too. And there's that conflict within on each stage of the story, from Dooku's perspective as to how he's going
I
to deal
love
with that. And it
He's
sets up.
literally caught in the middle of
Yeah,
of these of
and
these
I
and
love
it's
when he
like he's
says
aware of that at the start because he's
yeah, I
sent the
love when he
shell.
says the line. He says a line, yeah, yeah, the shell, that like the shell that's
Mhm.
like, too big for the hermit crab and all that.
Mm,
But I love the line when he talks about it's a tricky thing, this training of apprentices. You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's like it's a very, very I mean, the moment that Asajj shows up, the moment that
Mhm.
Sidious learns her name, he'd of course be thinking about it. I mean, how could you not? It's baked into. It's why the rule of two is there. You're
Mm,
not supposed to do that because two weaker ones can rise up and overpower a more powerful one. But beyond that, it's what Bane understood and why he's not one of my favorite characters per se. Certainly not anymore. Like young teenage me loved him. Like yeah, he's an objectivist nightmare. Not that I was, you know what I mean. But it's just like as he's that's a great villain. Yeah, I thought he was a great anti-hero rather, and that's even what the book styled him as in its sort of official description of what is the story. It's like an anti-hero told from the dark side's perspective. But what he understood was this is just again, for want of a better term, human nature. Like if you're going to follow the Sith code, you can't get around this. So you may as well come up with a rule that ensures that the order benefits from it.
mm,
That's the whole thing. There isn't like let's not kid ourselves here. Like this is going to happen. You are not you're not going to be allowed to just go unchallenged. That doesn't work. Um, but and so for Dooku to be like, yeah, it's a tricky thing. This training of apprentices, and there's also an attraction here, which is like similar to his I think quite one way interaction with his previous one of his last Padawans, maybe his last one, Kamari Vosa.
Mari Bosa. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a one way thing. Like she was into him, but Ventress says in this one she knows Dooku fancies her, and whether she's wrong about that, it doesn't matter. She believes it, and he doesn't. I don't think gainsay it, really. So it's interesting. There's a kind of a heavily complicated, sort of situation here. And there's just the temptation. You want to be
Yeah.
number one. That's
And
there. But it's also, as
and
he knows, you can't walk it back. Once you start going
mm.
down this, you've got to commit to it. Sidious is a scary guy. You know what I mean? It's like it's just a really really. I mean, Yoda's scary. You know, like after like
Especially, yeah, in this book.
As we
yeah,
find
you know,
out. But I like
yeah,
to your point, Matt, though, I also like, because like Sidious even just like straight up asks Dooku, like, do you still love him? Like
yeah,
his
yeah.
love Yoda. Do you love him as a teacher? So and like, in but what I also find, like, and this is so Sidious, like the fact that when Dooku denies it, but then Sidious turns that and says, well, I mean, a student should always love his
Yeah.
teacher. It's like as like a way of trying to like tighten his grip on, and like,
Yeah.
oh, like I forget, like when
There's
I
no right way to
it's
answer the question. There's
it's
absolutely no correct
so it's
answer.
so
Yeah,
Sidious. It's so
yeah.
Sidious because he is literally playing every angle possible to ensure that Dooku stays under his thumb in this moment. And it's again, like I can't.
That's weird as hell.
That was a strange thing for us all to see,
That's
just
never
randomly
happened
appear then.
before.
That I've never seen
Yeah.
that before in my life.
Neither have I.
For those listening,
That was
a
not
random
planned.
little thumbs up text bubble just appeared by Evan's face, and we have no idea why. But let's see if that happens again.
Did it
That's
happen
never
for you when
happened
you just?
before. Ever.
I don't know. That
Maybe.
is weird as
Anyway,
hell.
moving on.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, to that
big
point,
thumbs up from Sidious there. Oh, sorry. Just a little touch point as well. The book itself literally explicitly spells that out as well. It points out the fact that he is the schemer. So of course he thinks in these terms. I like that it
But
makes very
Yeah.
clear. That was the less artful example of it, but there's trillions of those in this, so we can hardly complain. It makes clear that each of the characters understands at least partially where the others are coming from, and how that kind of that forms an interplay and balance between them.
And
Well,
yeah,
that
They need
can
to
we
work around it.
before we abandon this topic, just on what you're just saying there, because that's a later conversation. But I like that you brought it up now because in the context that Dooku is talking about, he is musing about whether Sidious schemes too much, like whether any of this is necessary. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And the great thing about that, because he does the whole, like to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail kind of analogy, almost
Mm.
word for word. That's what he's saying there, right? He incorporates the author incorporates a version of that into the text to spell out what Dooku's saying there. That's the other thing. It's not all just a malicious thing. It's just a human thing.
Mm.
Sometimes you think your boss is wrong. Like sometimes you think you have a better way of doing things. And it's that quiet way of questioning that again will always feed into the Sith way of doing things. It's on some level, you're always going to be going, this isn't quite how I would do it. Like, but I'm not the master. Or am I? And should I be?
Can I
Like
be?
a kind of a
Yeah.
thing. It's yeah,
that
can I be? It's the and
that becomes
it's again this whole thing
more.
of Dooku lying to himself. That those are the terms he's honestly thinking of it in. It's just this isn't quite the way I would manage the situation.
Mm.
But is it a darker thought than that? Is it should I take him out? And of course Sidious knows it, which is why I wanted us to talk about this because you introduced the whole concept of Sidious dropping in Anakin Obi-Wan into Dooku's path because he knows of the jealousy angle, which we should talk about because
That's a big
I
thing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's only a thing in this book, to be fair, but it's such a good thing in the book, the way it's used. I don't think of Dooku as constantly comparing himself to Anakin's
No,
rising
for
star,
sure.
for
It's
example.
occasionally implied just on the human nature
Yeah, it's
level.
kind
That
of
would be
it
an
does come up
aspect,
in
but it's
Revenge of
never
the
like a
Sith a
key
little bit,
character
but
thing.
yeah.
There in this, and that's it. Yeah, and in
Mm.
Revenge of the Sith, it's almost. I mean, he's literally. It's this confluence of destiny thing. I mean, Anakin's sitting down at the bottom of the stairs, walking up the ones that Dooku's about to be thrown down. I mean, that's it's just symbolism. Of course, he's
Mm.
thinking it then, but I never think of him as being like this sort of. I was the most famous Jedi before young Skywalker, so that's not really a part of his
Mhm,
character. You know what I
mhm.
mean? But they do really, really well with it in this book. And I think it adds so much value that I like that it's a thing effectively when it didn't really need to be. Is what I'm getting at
Yeah.
here. But
And it doesn't come off as petulant.
Mm.
It comes off
no,
more as like
Human.
arrogant, but not.
human,
Yeah, like it.
flawed
Yeah,
human, yeah, human flaw, relatable
absolutely.
flaw. It's
And
Dooku's a sociopath in most of his other works. Here he feels. I wouldn't say he feels like a sociopath. He's definitely disturbed and conflicted and cold, but he feels not that sociopaths aren't human, but he feels more well-rounded. He feels more. It feels less like he's broken by nature per se, and that's probably an offensive way to say it. But it's more like just it really does feel that he's had like his life could have gone a different way.
Yeah, he
You know what I
stumbled
mean?
from the
And
path in this story, and I think that's part of how the story is kind of framing it. He feels at least a part of him, because he's again not consciously thinking this per se for the early part, but he feels like I've gone too far, I've strayed too far from the path. Can I come back? Is there a way back for me? You know, it's a spiritual, personal,
And
psychological problem that he's
yeah,
trying to solve here. And Yoda, his teacher, that please can you help me? It's quite for help, effectively the shell, you know,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some ways. But
it's a
sorry, I'm going.
yeah. I was just gonna say, yeah, it's like it's kind of one of those cases where it's like, you don't believe you don't believe the olive branch is there even when it's being like put in front of your eyes, sort of
Mm.
thing, because that's a huge theme of this book. And it's also, again, like before we like go back to the temple with like the tournament stuff, I think it is really worth noting that this book is easily one of the most extensive looks into Dooku's origins we ever get.
Yeah.
Like in
Yeah.
not just his Jedi career, but even before that, like his very early years on Sereno and his training in the temple before he even built his first lightsaber. Like we see a lot in this.
The uh,
Granted, unfortunately, this book does still have Thame Cerulean as a thing in it, which I've never been the biggest fan of. But we've discussed that in the past. Like I don't. That does
to
kind of
me,
go
he's
against.
to me, he's just not a thing. Complete non-entity.
Yeah,
Like I
I
do
just
not care.
wish.
Like that's one area where I'll assert headcanon. I have no use for Thames Cerulean. He's
We
Yoda's
don't.
Padawan.
Yeah. We don't get any mention of Lorian Nod or Sifo Dyas, which actually kind of surprised me. I'd forgotten that, like, because they factor so much into Dooku's like
Well,
origin and
I,
works and
I
whatnot.
think it's
But
a
I'm not saying
timing.
that's
the
a flaw or anything. It's
Yeah, I think
something
it's a
I'd
timing
forgotten
thing. He
before
didn't have
we.
time to spend on that with the scale of the book involved. But
Yeah,
just
yeah.
because you
the
touched on
side.
that specific issue there, I just want to bring back to the scene as well. One of the reasons that we get to kind of explore this little side path into Dooku's mindset is the fact that in where he's disagreeing with Sidious, he's perfectly reasonable in doing so from his perspective, because as far as they're concerned, they want to win the war, right? From Sidious's perspective, he doesn't want to win the war. It's never about that, and if he
Mhm.
does, it's on the other side. It's the way of, it's just the longer this conflict goes on, the more he's bleeding out the Jedi. That's the whole point for Sidious. Everyone knows that. But Dooku hasn't registered that fully, and there's a meta level where it addresses that and makes that clear within the scene that he is missing. And I really liked how it tied into all of the threads that we just talked about just there. It goes down his personal route, his personal journey, because he's looking at it from his eyes. He doesn't get the extra context that we do, that leads to everything that
Yeah.
happens on the Sidious side of things.
Right. Well,
I
that
wanted to
like
say,
Ventress even just really quick, Matt. Like Ventress even like brings this up earlier, and it like what you were saying earlier, like when we started this, Callan, about like how all the what ifs that could span from this book. It makes you wonder. Like you said, yeah, Sidious did want to win it from the other side, but that doesn't mean like it brings up the possibility. Like, what if the Confederacy won this war? Like, what if that actually happened? Because that is a very real. That was obviously a very real possibility, and what would have happened if Dooku had like won the Clone Wars. And again, we'll get, like I said, we'll get more. This feeds more into a scene later with Ventress, where she even like asks him straight up, like, "What do you think's gonna happen if you win this?" Sort of thing. But
Mhm.
kind of that just ties into other elements we mentioned before. So I just wanted to,
Yeah.
mention that.
Uh,
Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say I just wanted to, since because with the topic won't come up again probably, but on the Sifo point, that he was always Sifo Dyas was always a funny, like a mistake in my opinion. Like as a concept, he is like a midichlorian to me. I guess it's fine, added bit of the lore, I guess. But to introduce it in the way that you did and never bring it up again in a way that everyone's guaranteed to see or explain why it's there, completely like a misfire. Sifo Dyas's inclusion, like his name dropped in the movies. You know what I mean? He's the person who ordered the clone army to be constructed in the Jedi's name for the Republic. Where did the funds come from? Well, they come from Dooku. Dooku did this, right? But initially, the Plagueis novel sort of retconned it into a more complicated thing where Sifo actually did it, I guess, or I guess he always had. But it felt very much like in the original version of the story before the Plagueis novel, Dooku was the one to manipulate the whole thing, and then he killed Sifo Dyas as part of like his sort of proof that I'm on the dark side now. In a more
Mhm.
recent works, the story has been kind of changed and altered and kind of clipped and altered and tailored. And most significantly, the Plagueis novel, but also I don't remember exactly what was going on, but very recently, in the last handful of years, the Clone Wars. They kind of turned Yaddle into like sort of Dooku's test for I think no reason other than she's the only other person who could simulate a Yoda fight for them to animate. Um, So they completely changed her death to be that she's sort of in the new canon, kind of like this what Sifo-Dyas initially was. Sifo-Dyas was like, I don't know, somebody really, really just had like a dark mind and wanted to turn Sifo-Dyas into like a horror story. He was used to order the army. He was duped by Dooku and then killed to prove his worth for the Sith. And then the rumor was that his blood and organs had been used to revive Grievous.
Mm.
Like that's part of like what's going on in the
Yeah.
sack of organs inside is Sifo-Dyas's blood for no reason other than somebody just crazy. But yeah, so that point there, I just wanted to talk about Sifo-Dyas real quick, because he won't come up again. But it is like a linchpin in Dooku's story initially. But again, I understand kind of what we were talking about earlier. I think it was Kellen who mentioned timing of things might not have been right for the picture to be clear, and it only got more and more muddled as time went on. So I won't hold that against this book for any reason. Um, the other thing I want to talk about is the actual framing of the actual scene. Love Dead Jedi's hand still clutching the lightsaber, and Dooku recognizes this lightsaber, knows whose hand this was,
Mm.
knows who this was. It's not just a Dooku scene. Zhang Li is the name, but I couldn't have told you that before rereading it. I remembered it was a thing that he remembers there's a dead Jedi, and I remembered even that it was female. Didn't remember anything about her. But the other characters remember her. Like
Mm.
it's this whole thing of
And
dead
how they
Jedi are
remember
not
him
a
in
triumph
particular.
for Dooku, and the way that Asajj her whole thing is 17, number 17. Like I had 17 on my kill list before you took that one away from me. Her whole thing is this chomping at the bit, like I'm ready, like unleash me kind of a thing. And he's sort of like, I have a longer view of this, and this to me is not just. I mean, yeah, you're skilled or whatever, but like, I mean, I'm not impressed with this, and this alone is not a mark of mastery, or it doesn't mean I should confer you with the higher lore and mysteries. In some sense, this is a tragedy for me. I knew who this person was. And I don't even think he says that all to her. He's just musing about it. Her whole thing. I think of like Maul. I think of Maul and Qui-Gon in the Phantom Menace when the energy shields or separate
Mm.
them, and Qui-Gon's meditating, and Maul's pacing back and forth like a tiger in its cage or something, like waiting for the fight to continue.
It's exactly
Um,
that. Perfect visual
yeah,
encapsulation there.
yeah, it's that kind of a thing going on, and I just love that that's what leads power to Ghost Qui-Gon's voice saying he thinks he's lying. He does regret what the war has done, not just to I think to the galaxy as a whole, but specifically to what was his home, his family, the Jedi. He regrets a part of this, and there's no way Sidious doesn't pick up on that. And you know what I mean? It's like he must just be dripping in that. Sidious can tell that. So it's just a great thing. I love the fact that he knows whose lightsaber that was, because not every Jedi can do that. You know, it's a very much a. I mean, he was a lightsaber instructor, so he's gonna have seen more Jedi, you know, like wielding their blades and stuff like that. But it's such a Dooku specific thing. It was such a brilliant choice to express how his character is. Like this wasn't a famous Jedi. This was just somebody he knew and somebody he's not delighted is dead. You know, it's a really great way of showing that. And because he's a mentor, you know, but at the same time, again, to Yoda, he's a baby.
Yeah.
You know,
Just a little
I want
toddler
to
in a.
mention this a while ago, but the shell and all that, you called it a cry for help. I love the fact that even in the flashback, the shell and the message, it's almost more at home for somebody who's even younger than Dooku is in that scene. Like
Mm.
he's barely more than he's like a teenager. He's ready to leave.
He's
He's ready to
already
go
looking
out.
back in that moment. That's part of what that scene is.
Yes,
It's a flashback
yes.
of a almost flashback. It's really well done.
Yeah, really well done. I just wanted to, these were all things I wanted to say a bit ago before, because we've been talking about a lot of things,
Yeah,
which
it's
I'm
hard
glad because,
to
you
keep
know,
it in line
Yeah.
with
yeah,
the Sith side because
I
they
just
are
didn't want
scenes
to
scattered throughout the
lose any of
story.
it.
But talking about it in one go is
Yeah,
probably the better way of doing things until we get to the
It goes
finale.
through a
Anyway, that
lot.
should be
Yeah.
separate.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
having
no.
said that,
You mentioned this will like get us on track. You mentioned like Yoda talking to Qui-Gon. Yoda talks to
yeah,
Qui-Gon in this,
Oh yeah,
which
that is also a
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
because like that kind of like it's a sequence like when Yoda is kind of debating on like whether and like what he should do in this situation. This is like again right before the apprentice tournament. He's whether or not he is Dooku being serious about this? What should I do? This also is, prior to this, Max Lean actually brings up the concept of like, when we pass into the Force,
hmm
um, we just become part of this like nebulous, energy. And Yoda kind of brings up like, oh, some legends in the past of like Jedi retaining, and like she kind of like, well, that would be interesting. Obviously, that's set up, which is then followed by this sequence of, and I think with this, it's a little. I don't know if it necessarily creates an issue in a direct sense, but the book really does like it's not ambiguous as to whether or not he's actually talking to Qui-Gon. It is
Uh,
very much set up. What?
yeah,
You
I
disagree?
sorry. No, I wasn't going to disagree at all. I thought you were going to when you said it's not ambiguous. I was just going to say I'm glad that it's not. Like that's
Mm.
all. Like
Yeah.
it's I for me, I think I don't know what George was thinking writing the whole Force Ghost thing as like some kind of lost knowledge. I don't see what the Jedi are, or what I don't understand what the Jedi think they are or believe about their own beliefs if they don't just know that. I mean, that's what oneness with the Force is. You don't need to necessarily have a physical presence. The idea that they would go out about being Jedi without any sense of what Qui-Gon rediscovers. I mean, to the point where they actively thought Yoda was out of his mind in the
Oh my
cartoon. Like,
god,
you
yeah,
know what I
that
mean?
was
They
Oh,
actively thought he was
insane.
losing his marbles. Like, I mean, that to me, that reduces the Force down to you can retrieve your lightsaber and sometimes you have bad dreams.
Hmm.
Pointless. I mean, like, this is what a Jedi is supposed to be. So
yeah.
I would never have written it be that the Jedi just don't know anything about that. I'm really glad that they just played it. I mean, and quite frankly, I always read it as like in Attack of the Clones when Anakin is killing the Sand People after for revenge for his mother. Uh, Yoda senses that,
Hmm.
and you can hear Liam Neeson's voice saying, "No, Anakin," or whatever. It's the idea that it's framed that way, and Yoda doesn't hear what Qui-Gon's saying, or yeah, maybe he doesn't know that. Maybe he's mixing timelines somehow, but that just feels wrong. It feels so much easier and truer, like closer to the truth of what I think the Jedi is supposed to be. That he just accepts this, and I really like that it is a conversation
Yeah.
where what
Uh,
he's thinking and what Qui-Gon are
No,
saying
yeah.
are completing each
It's
other.
not. Yeah, it's not a bad thing by any imagination. Yoda even says that like he feels as though Qui-Gon. It's not that Qui-Gon was coming to him. It's as though he was just always there.
Yeah,
It does it
You
really
can
Force.
like
well.
if you really
Yeah.
and if you really do want to just kind of like frame it into like the wider lore, like you can just see it as like, oh, he gradually became more and more aware of his presence until finally Revenge of the Sith, when he finally puts like everything together about what this
I mean,
is, what Qui-Gon did, and whatnot. If you have
it's
to, I'm saying
just
I'm
it's
it's
it's just it's a
best
fool's
just to go
errand
with it.
because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a fool's errand because then you watch Kenobi and
Gosh.
10 years for 10 years
Let's
Kenobi
not
was
talk about
doing
that one.
nothing. No, but this is what I'm saying because to me the Clone Wars show is that, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
It inserts itself on stuff that worked better. In some sense, the prequels are that. It inserts itself. It's part of the story. It's what people know. It's what people have seen. More people watch things than they
Heavy
read things.
headcanoning
It's also
required here.
stupid. It's also stupid. It's like if you watch Kenobi, the logic is that Yoda said, "I've got training for you at the end of Return of the Jedi, or at the end of Revenge of the Sith," and Kenobi didn't do anything with it for 10 years, and then Qui-Gon's ghost showed up, and I mean, how much less mystical is it that for like 9 years he was hanging around with like Qui-Gon in the desert, like watching Luke kind of side-eyed? That's dumb. It should just be part of Jedi dumb that this is what you do. Like this is part of being a good Jedi.
And if you want
Being
to make sure that's
attuned
still
to this
something
sort of
that
thing.
only the most enlightened can do, then that's fine. Yoda is the textbook example of how you establish that, and he can teach others to be like it as well. It's not, you didn't have to explain any of it, and if you did, this is not the way you should.
No.
Basically,
No, I mean,
I do.
I agree with you that you didn't have to explain it, but every choice that was made in the mainstream
It was the wrong
outside of
one. Yeah,
like
exactly.
what Evan's getting at is like this is sort of an anomaly the way that this book was presented or the way the event was presented. I'm saying that the anomaly should have just been the standard, I guess
Yeah,
is what I'm
this
trying
is
to
the
say.
way it should have been done.
So
It
Yeah.
shows
Oh,
Stuart's
yeah.
understanding
yeah.
of what the law, and again, it should be, yeah, from our perspective, should
No,
be,
no,
but
no,
still.
no,
But in
no, no,
this, I'm
no,
pretty
no.
damn
I'm going to be an
confident on
arrogant
this.
asshole on this one. Like, yes, what
Well,
Callan
in,
just
in
said is
terms of
correct,
what it
of
was
course.
originally presented
Like,
as, yes,
yeah, in terms of
as
what
well.
Callan's saying, yes, this is subjective. As far as I'm concerned, it's the number one thing that they got completely wrong about what Jedi are. So it's like you fail to understand that, and I'm including the creators in this. If you do, then you're failing to understand the appeal of Jedi as an entity.
Go and watch
I
Empire
just I
Strikes
don't
Back and all the
understand that.
scenes with Yoda,
Yeah,
basically, is what you need to do. Which is
Seriously.
something
yeah,
that I think Stuart
But
very
yeah,
clearly did in this interpretation. We haven't talked about it yet,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we'll get more into it later, but this is the Yoda for me. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah,
with bar the only exception, and arguably this is even better than that, the Empire Strikes Back
Oh
original
no,
appearance.
this is
So
better. Like
I
this
think it
is
is, yeah.
this is peak Yoda. This is the best Yoda. I've
absolutely.
always said, I've always said it's like as an Empire, you see what Yoda has become. He's at the end of his life. It's literally the dark times. The fall of the Jedi was a long time ago. The quote unquote only hope is sort of the Anakin's son. That's already kind of, and then you meet him and he's impatient, and it's like, he. Yeah, I've watched this one for a long time and he's got problems. I don't know. I'm not so sure. It's like you get why he's that way. You don't necessarily want to hang around with Yoda. You know what I mean? In this one, though, I mean, it's the perfect blend. It's like it's wise Yoda. It's always
Mm,
been there, but it's
Hmm.
it's like before. I wouldn't say that Yoda's problem is that he's a cynic or a pessimist, but he's definitely
colored by the
lost.
times.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah, he's
exactly.
been
Yeah.
drained a bit.
Yeah,
But yeah, no. So
but
I love that. There was a point I was getting to as well beforehand that I've derailed myself on.
um,
What we were
No,
talking
it's
about
probably
before
me. I
that.
interrupted you. Sorry about
yeah.
that.
No, it's all right. What were we talking about immediately
Do
before
you
this?
guys just want to move into the next
Yeah,
story
we can talk
beats?
about the Padawan stuff, because
Because
that's
Yeah.
pretty
it's
much where
pretty
we're at.
straightforward. The tournament. It's a very I think this is also where we get our proper introduction to we, and the big thing with we is very much the polar opposite of Scout, and that's some big part of his character, because whereas Scout is like not very naturally gifted, he's extremely naturally gifted, like by comparison. Like it's even stated at one point that like he's not as good as Anakin Skywalker, but he's like
But
only
he
like one
carries
tier
it
removed.
better. I love that
Yeah,
line.
that I'm getting to that too. Because but and what I love about their dynamic though is like this could have so easily come off as like stereotypical teen melodrama. I'm the talented one, you're not as talented, you're jealous of me, I'm jealous of you. We butt heads sort of thing. And I'm not saying we don't get shades of that in this book, because we do, but it's presented in a way where, at least, to me, like, yes, they have that butting heads moments throughout the book, but you never feel like it's cliche in the sense of like, oh, they hate each other, now
No,
they
I
like
mean,
each other. It
it's
it,
it's
it
just
builds up
it's
naturally, and there's always a level of respect and understanding there. Again, classic Jedidom. They don't let their egos get in the way in terms of how they're presented, especially since they're teenagers too, which is not always
well.
the easiest thing to do. Like these two are written very
Yeah,
realistically, and
they're
that
I think
human, but
this
they're
book and
Jedi, and this book gets that.
the
yeah,
problem
that's what I'm
the
saying.
pro
Yeah.
the usual problem, if there is one, when there's a cliche, the problem usually comes from the fact that the characters are not real characters. The point of them is
Mhm,
the rivalry. These characters are fully formed without that. Just them interacting is added spice. But Wee's his own character. Wee's
mhm,
issue is he is extraordinarily gifted, sure, but his big thing is force visions, and he's seen supposedly how he will die, and he believes he's going to be killed by a Jedi, and it's like, what does that mean? You wouldn't ever think, oh, the chosen one's going to turn into Darth Vader and kill me. You think I'm going to go really badly wrong and a Jedi's going to put me down. And like that has nothing to do with Scout. But them interacting with each other and him liking her and there being this sort of back and forth between them, it's like, yeah, okay, it's fun character stuff. But the point of him is not Scout rivalry. That's why it
yeah,
works. That's why,
absolutely.
and she's the same way. Like she has her own stuff completely going on in her head that's nothing to do with him. Um, it's just you have to write characters first, and then the scenario comes secondary. And he does both of them extraordinarily well, so that's why it works really well. They're also not the only two young Jedi in this. That's another good thing is she bounces herself off of other characters, and you can see what she sees in them. I want to talk about some of that when we bring into the actual Padawan tournament a
Yeah, the
bit,
different
because all of that
flavors and
stuff, I
combinations of that are fantastic.
I forgot how great some of that. I know I always remembered liking that. I remembered like her way of like winning and everything. I remembered all that, but the fact that like it's just so she appreciates the Jedi she didn't want to be, the little Padawan, I forget his name.
Yeah.
He was younger than her and
Pax, is
like
it?
more talented. Pax, yeah, it
Yeah.
rhymed with Max. That's right. Yeah, Pax. Like that is such a fun, and it's also confusing because there's another grand called Pax Team in Plagueis, right? But anyway, Pax, she like when he's all congratulating like her for teaching him a lesson, like in how he had like lost and everything, but he was so happy for the lesson, and she's all, "You're so good," like she like you know what I mean? She's just
Echoing the
so like,
previous point, exactly.
yeah,
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 I
it's
loved all the
so
flavors of
so
that,
so
and
sweet.
also
Yeah.
the outraged one as well. Who you're supposed who's coming into this obviously as the antagonist of this sequence.
Yeah, Canyon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but at
no,
the
but
same
she's
time, yeah, exactly. At
perfectly
the
valid
same time,
character.
you're
Yeah,
with her on every
she's
single beat,
completely
but she's
right.
like,
Yeah, I know.
but
Yeah,
what?
she's right about everything.
I
Yeah,
know, right?
She is absolutely
yeah,
right about everything she
She
says.
like she did. She,
Wrong
yeah, she
flavor,
did.
and she definitely
Yeah.
flirts with the innocent emotional aspects of the dark side, things when she's getting a bit tantrumy about it. But again, human. She's not human, but human as a sentiment and a process, and it reads very naturally. And she is largely right, and the Iron Hands is ruling on the various different things. I don't think we'll go for that
hmm
one, but no, that's allowed, fair enough. And no, I'll step back. Like she's
Hmm.
desperately trying not to smile and show favoritism, while also teaching the
hmm
right lessons at the right moments.
Right.
The whole sequence is so beautifully
Yeah.
crafted in establishing
Yeah.
these characters. I mean, I wanted to mention briefly beforehand, but we've gone to the tournament side of things, Matt. You discussed earlier about the trilogy aspect. This could have been a trilogy.
yeah,
When it came
yeah,
up before about Wee and Scout, if it was a trilogy, it would end with them encountering each other and having if he has fallen, for example, which I don't think is something that we should have had, but if he had fallen, she would be the one that kills him in his vision. If that had been the way that played out, this sequence with the tournament, if it was a trilogy, these characters would have the time to come back into the story later on and be more fulfilled and more realized throughout the different plot. You could extend this all out. He's
I
spent
mean,
the time and laid the groundwork to make this a
yeah.
larger story than it ended up being.
I feel like if I could wave a wand and have things go differently, I would have had it be like a trilogy with these characters just because I like them so much.
Mm.
It what it ends up being, I think, does work really well, where he's killed by Anakin, and that
Yes,
being like,
absolutely. Yeah.
that works really, really
That's
great.
Where
But
we is from as well, for the readers or listeners who aren't aware. Yeah, this is another beautiful example of how people pick random things from the films and just stick them in the books and, okay, let's make a character out of it. This is a
yeah,
fantastic success story about that. You don't need to do that for every tiny little thing, and that's one of the fun things about Star Wars, that you can, and if you do it well, should. But yeah, this is an example of that, where this is the
yeah.
guy that gets killed on a hologram by Anakin, and that's it. That's the
Yeah.
thing
That
he's foreseeing.
just to like give some backstory. Like, yeah, he's one of the Padawans alongside Sindralig, who
hmm
fights Anakin. We see it briefly in Revenge of the Sith, and then we get a little bit more through it with the novelization.
yeah,
Because the thing is, like we've already established, like, yes, he is seeing a vision of a Jedi killing him, and that's Anakin or Vader
yeah.
at that point. And it is, I will say this, it's like, it is interesting how they play with the fact, like, oh, like, the lightsaber, how they look, like that's a Jedi, like that. It wasn't from his perspective, it's not a Sith, even though it
Right.
is a Sith
Yeah,
later on. And
yeah.
it's cool,
I
it's a
mean,
cool little play of perspective with that.
yeah.
But yeah, he
I love it. It's a great story, like that, a little miniature story, a little mini tragedy there. If in my
hmm
heart of hearts, if I had like carte blanche to do what I want, I definitely would have had we and Scout continue on in like a Quinlan
Mm.
Voss kind of, we're gonna
yeah,
escape the dark times kind of a thing. Because I just like the characters so much. But as what they did though
kind of
is good
out a little
storytelling,
bit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in the most barest sense. Yeah.
Uh,
Sorta. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I like what they did with it, and the fact that it was just taken from the book, from the film, and making it into a character. But yeah, I also, more on top of that, I like that wasn't the point of him in any way, shape, or form. It was a
mhm.
little bit of a flavoring on top, as like, I have seen my death, but his whole point wasn't he came onto page and was like, I have seen my death. This is my thing for the story. That was the thing that came later. It was a small piece of it. The main thing was his connection to Scout and the vision he's had of her and Ventress, and that question of, what am I going to do? I didn't get to the point. Internally, I was struggling with the point of what I do about this scene, and that's what he's carrying through for the rest of the story. And the way it connects to Scout and the fact that it shines that light on the fact that she is a Jedi. She may not be the most powerful, she may not be the most skilled, but she's tenacious, and she represents what a Jedi should be in so many ways. And that's what Yoda speaks to, and that's what the story speaks to, and how she lights a fire in we and potentially, depending on the idea of the deterministic nature of it, saves him from turning. If she hadn't spoken when she does, regardless of her little instinct kicking in, he may have fallen. Is the kind of possible question mark that's left with the scene, and that's something that kind of speaks to what she represents within the story and what she represents within the Order. That little spark that Yoda sees and wants to keep lit in the sky, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Which, like, obviously leads into, as Matt said, Yoda grandmastering Jai into taking, Scout as his
love
student.
this. I
Her
love the setup. I love
reaction and
her reaction was great, but the ground rules were great too because it was like if she has to win like to be his Padawan, but it's also just like, well, okay, if she gets into like the sort of upper division of it, we just won't get we'll allow her to keep her place, which I think is just so much more fair than a if just a winner she's out kind of a thing. I
Yeah.
love that Yoda provided options that would work for kind of everybody, is like, and also because we haven't really talked about the fact she isn't like just somebody who's been stationed at the temple the entire time. She had a master, but the joke of it was so short lived because the master died at Geonosis, right? So she had a shot at like an actual Jedi life, and it got ripped away from her, which wasn't fair either. So it's not like she's just been a perpetual flunky who we've kind of been taken care of out of charity. There is a case to be made that she didn't really get a fair shake anyway. So it's in some sense only natural she should be given another chance. So yeah, just love everything about it. And also because Jai Merrick, he's a really good Jedi and everything. He's a good person, but to me more so than the other characters, even Max Liam to an extent, I think the entire point of Jai Merrick is just the impact he has on the other characters, like specifically for Scout. But I mean, he has a great scene with Wee too, like where he talks about all this, and we
Arguably
can
his
get into that
strongest
and
mentoring moment as
for
well.
sure,
Yeah.
it's absolutely
I
is.
mean, absolutely.
But
Yes.
it's just
Think
like
about
the
it.
yeah, like
In the
the which is a bit ironic because it's supposed to be Scout's mentor, but the point
yeah.
of him, is that he reflects on other characters. Max Liam to me is kind of just her own character. Like Max Liam is interesting with her what do you call it, internal monologue, and Jai's is good too, but like all of it is about like how he is compared to others. um so yeah, I love that Yoda's like, yeah, if she wins, she's yours and there's nothing
Yeah.
you can do about it. It's sort of like,
It'll be good
okay,
for both of
I
you.
don't
I
I
mean,
don't
you think
yeah,
we let them think that we're they're benefiting from us, but it works both ways. I love the fact that
yeah,
every single scene in throughout the story is just playing into every single theme and question it raises. It's
right.
so artfully done.
yeah.
Mhm.
This is all the
Which
stuff that I had like lost a lot of the nuance of, maybe never appreciated when I first read it, but like that's the stuff that like just smacks me like in the face, like on reread, just like this is so
Mm.
good, like this is perfect.
And it's
Even
what's
down, we didn't
missing
talk
from
about
so
it.
much of Star Wars these days.
The funny thing, oh, it's completely absent. But the funny thing about it, right?
uh,
The funny thing that I forgot was like when he's talking, I think uh he's talking to Jai or Max when it's like breakfast for Yoda and it's like like a bowl of grouse and like he's
oh yeah,
talking or whatever and he's doing like his whole, oh, sage advice have I for and then like out of nowhere like and he starts trying to like,
Ugh.
I
his
love
Roy
it.
bowl is
tries and
like
takes his
I
like
love
the
it.
droid
bowl.
is
Yeah,
trying to say, this ain't food. Like I'm not serving you this. It's like that is my food. This is like that's not food.
Special
It's
made
the
for me. It
best.
is every day.
it's
The
It's
whole
the
it goes
best.
back to
It's the
saying
best
food has
callback
to
to
be
the Empire Strikes Back
yeah.
thing, where
hitting
Luke's like
R2D2 with
sniffing
his
it and everything.
cane.
Oh, this is
Exactly.
nasty.
We
Yeah, yeah,
we've I mean we talked about the fact that this is the peak Yoda for all of the obvious reasons,
yeah,
the what wisdom, the philosophy, the mentorship, all of that stuff. But it is also the best for the mischief, for the little grandfatherly
yes,
Mhm.
fun. The when it first I think
Hitting
I
the droid
messaged you
with
at the
his
time
cane.
when he reached that point in the book, I mentioned it. The fact that when he's doing the retinal scan or the face scanner, when he sticks his tongue out,
Oh
uh-huh,
yeah,
it's just such a tiny micro moment that so beautifully flowers the character and by that
outside
stage of the story and shows the understanding that the author has for him, and it all the time,
outside of
with the
his
possible exception of the travel sequences when he gets a bit over the top sometimes.
right.
All of the other beats
Um,
that get hit throughout the rest of the story are fantastic there.
more often than not, like because like the scenes with Dooku outside of those scenes, because those have like a lot of gravitas, but
Mm.
most of Yoda's other appearances, I was like actively like smiling or laughing while
Yeah.
listening. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It was like it was really, really fun, and just I think more easily than most other works, this could translate into a film or an animated film pretty
Absolutely.
much like exactly as it is, with the minor bits of tailoring here or there. But I mean, it's so fun. I want this to be like a movie that people could watch.
Mm,
And again, book has its merit. Book is in some way more potent and powerful a tool, but it's just the nature of things. More people view things than they do read. So
mm.
it's a shame to me that most people don't know this version of Yoda. Like just by and large, plenty, obviously, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands do like and did read this book, but it's nothing compared to like just everybody who knows the name Yoda. I wish more people would read this book. It's so good.
Not even just for the appreciation of the character and the content. I do genuinely believe this book has something to teach everyone.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
various different approaches, very different moments. You can learn a lot about life and yourself from this book, and that sounds so grandiose and over the top, but I think it is
No, no,
true.
that's what literature is.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
think
Yeah,
this is
art
true of
is.
this.
Like
should be.
yeah. This is art. This book is art.
Yeah,
Like
one hundred percent.
that's what I was getting at earlier. It's not just a pulpy fun romp. It is those things, especially in the next segment of like the travel sequence, which I think we can transition into here.
Mm,
But the point of the book, what you're talking about, it's like these meditations on life. That's what literature is,
mm,
so it's really, really good. But anyway, set up the next segment of the book. Uh
This is
I
essentially like
always
the travel. Yeah, this is
yeah.
essentially like when they all finally decide. So Yoda decides to accept Dooku's offer
Mhm.
for what he interprets it as. He decides to take, Jymeric, MacLeod, the Padawans with him on the sojourn to Vjun. He does obviously Yoda being such a public figure, especially in this era, because he is essentially
Mhm.
the one of the high, the highest general in the Jedi's representation for the clone army. So we can't just go somewhere without there being some sort of scrutiny. So he decides to. This is where things get a little like again. You said those
yeah.
pulpy elements. He decides to hire an actor to
Not just an
impersonate
actor, but
him.
an
No,
actor.
Yeah, yeah.
this
This is
this
this
has
is
always been the thing that I remembered this happened. I
Yeah, as a
forgot how
weird
I
like,
forgot
huh, about the story.
I forgot how prominent a thing it was. You know what I mean? And it's a great. This feels like it belongs in the 2008 show as an episode. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But it's also fun. It's what's his name? I can't remember. Ch-
uh
I can't remember either.
there's
Patch.
there's a ch sound in there somewhere. I thought for sure Evan would know. He knows everything.
This is
Um,
true.
oh,
anyway, he's a 2 foot tall actor, right? Like I mean, and so
right.
it's like the point of him is he's a serious actor, he's a thespian, yes,
He
but
takes
he's
his
the
work
right
very
size.
seriously. Yes.
And he's played Yoda before, just like
Yes, yeah,
because
many
yeah,
Stage
performances,
play, yeah.
and learned quite a
He
few
views
things
this as
from
like
it.
the role of a
Apparently.
lifetime. Yeah.
we did
But
him wrong in our list of characters because he has a perspective. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I
I
need to
don't know why I
find his
can't remember
name,
the
but
name.
you guys
We've also
talk
got
while I look
Pax one
that up.
earlier as well. But yeah,
Yeah,
well, yeah, I
the
mean,
good.
fact that he
basically he essentially uses him as a scapegoat, so he and his Jedi can get on a ship and go to Vjun. Yoda still needs to disguise himself, so he hides inside a droid. Which I don't know if maybe I'm thinking a little too deeply into this, but is him hiding inside a droid supposed to be a reference to Kenny Baker because him
Possibly.
being inside
possibly,
R2D2,
yeah,
the
I hadn't
original?
thought of that
I
to
don't
be
know if
honest.
that's intentional or not, but I don't know. It just kind of made me think of that a little bit.
By
But
the
this
way,
is probably the
his,
sequence where like a lot happens, but this is probably where I have the least to say in the sense of because
sure, yeah,
aside
this
from a
won't
few
take long.
sequences, there's a few in here that like are really worth talking about, but mainly towards the end, I would say.
Yeah,
Mm.
This is also the
the
sequence
actor's
where we
name
learn that, huh?
Alias Chuff, by the way,
Peleus
just so
Chuff,
we
and it
can
was a
get that
P
out of the way.
something.
Uh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you
yes.
yeah.
go.
Great. Yeah. This is also the time too. This is because this is important. We learn that from Fidelis, who was the droid spying on the Jedi Temple. He finally, makes his way onto their ship and meets them. We actually learn that we is the heir to House Malru, which is the family that essentially, rule. Well, I don't. Did they rule all of Vjun or just like that part of it?
In
I
part,
don't
I think,
remember.
from memory.
In part, yeah. They were one of the ruling families of Vjun, which is
Mm.
obviously, and it just so happens that their castle is where Dooku has, staked his claim to Vjun. And his mother is actually, who's been driven insane at this point, is essentially working for Dooku as like his maid. As there's no other way to say it. Because the thing with Vjun, and I think we have to emphasize too, is Vjun is a planet steeped in the dark side. A
Yeah.
lot of a lot of powerful Force sensitives have come from there, but well, Wee's line in particular, but the planet is so heavily steeped in darkness that the vast majority of the population went insane. There's very few people, acid rain, killer plants. Like it's essentially like just an evil planet, which
Darth
made it.
Vader had a home here,
I was
basically.
about to say, I
Holiday
was about to
home.
say, like
Yeah.
this is like anyone who's played, Dark Forces or read some of read Dark Empire or some of the other books. Like this is the planet where Darth Vader's castle literally.
I feel
It's
like
I don't, literally
I feel like
is like that.
earlier on in the publication history, like it was like this, and like places like Korriban would like
Mm.
buy for like your dark side world. You know what I mean? It's kind of like been lost to time in terms of more recent works, I imagine. But Vjun used to be like a big name, and I mean it's still effective. It still works. You still have stories like this one that deal with it. But it used to be one of those. Oh yeah, Vjun, dark
Big
side,
name. Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah,
You know.
you could
This.
even
Um.
go on it when you in Jedi if you play Jedi Academy.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
so that because of that, we learn that he's the heir, and this droid, Fidelis, was actually sent to keep an eye on him because Fidelis he served Wee's family for a very long time, and he's very, very, very dedicated to his job, and
This.
this leads to an internal conflict with Wee being reintroduced to his home planet and his biological family connections being torn between that and his position as a Jedi, obviously.
I wanted to. Could I butt in because I had some questions because this is where
Yeah.
my memory is failing me, even though we've been through this recently. This information was doled out over the span of the book, but obviously we doesn't learn about it until here. Earlier than this, though, Yoda tells MacLeod that he was born on Vjun, which is interesting. She didn't know that. She had him as a student, and she didn't know his past really.
Mm.
Um, uh, this is where I forget what happens, and I'm hoping one of you or both of you can enlighten me. Her take on what happened is that like she was drunk and the Jedi stole, you know, her child from her, like without really her permission.
Mm.
What is the way that Yoda says it? Because I don't remember what Yoda says or like how much detail he goes into it when he's telling
If I
this to
recall, he mentions the fact that
Max.
the
Mm,
father was murdered, the mother was in a bad way. I can't remember the exact context
the
that it describes
father,
that in,
yeah,
but
the
it was
father,
basically
like
they were
he tried
rescuing her from a
to,
bad situation that she wanted her to.
yeah,
Because he was
because the
aware that
father
she was
was,
a force sensitive too. He said she was strong. Like
Yeah.
he
they
emphasized
both
that
were,
point. Yeah.
yeah, they both were, and his father actually tried to pull a Darth Plagueis and impose his will on
Yeah.
the
But
midichlorians of his planet, which actually ended up backfiring, and it drew him and it drove him, his family, and a good portion of the population of the planet insane to the point where they overthrew him.
I like that it gave that explanation. We never need it. It could just be a dark planet and that's it. The wildlife alone makes it
it could also
that
just
fits that
be
flavor.
a genetic thing,
Yeah, yeah,
if it had
exactly. It
to
doesn't
be,
need to be explained, but this is the
just mental
light touch
illness. Yeah.
example where just for a little bit of flavor on this planet, there happened to be some noble that pushed things to science too far and it corrupted the bloodline or whatever it is. Just that little soft touch occasionally adds a bit of spice. So I didn't mind it in this instance. Just because we're talking about the context here and it does relate in
Yeah.
terms of how we learned
Go
about
ahead.
it from the center of the story. This is where for me the kind of connective tissue starts to get stretched a little bit.
Yes.
Whereas before
Mm.
this, the first third of the book, it's been so tightly connected and interwoven, and everything's layered and perfectly connected and spreading out for the rest of the story. All of that is beautifully set up. At the center state point here now, where we're starting to learn a bit more of the backstory and a bit more of how the Maru household and family line is connected to things, all of that stuff. With a few exceptions of like scenes with Marek and Wee and little interplay moments between Scout and Wee, etc. All throughout that train sequence. Or ship sequence. Sorry, I keep for some reason
It's like
picturing it as a
train.
train. I'm picturing it as a train, but it's a ship. It's a lot more sparse on the kind of deep theming and deep character beats, and the plot's focus that we do get is connecting to things like the Malru line, which to me, I mean, I'd arguably slightly forgotten that the Malru aspect was even relevant to the story of Wii. Considering it's connected to one of the Padawans that comes along on the journey, there's no real in-narrative explanation
Well, no,
for
see,
why it's all part of the same story, because Wee was chosen basically at random because he was born on the planet, right? There's no... This could have been any Padawan, and it would have solved the same plot purpose. So having the story
no,
be
no, no. See,
connected and
this
tied
is
to the Malru's dark side of things, I didn't feel like it was connected too
I
much.
I agree there's a problem here, but I don't know if I phrase it the same way as you is my whole thing. This is where it's to me about structure. This is why I say I feel like this book wishes it was longer, because all the stuff that it is doing is valid. It's
Mm.
all it's all bunched up in a book that isn't interested equally in all of it. And this begins with the droids. You know what I mean? Like explaining this backstory and the Solus
Mm.
is got a connection. He's got his own motive. You know, he wants to he needs credits so he can repair himself. But he's a droid. So how do you do that? Well, I'm basically going to turn into like an informant slash bounty hunter type of thing, and I'm going to give this information to Asajj, and she's going to pay me. I personally am not interested in that, but
Mm.
that's a good story. It's a well developed idea, but stitched in here, it doesn't feel it doesn't feel as necessary. It feels like you could have just gotten here so many other different ways if you
You,
wanted
you
to.
you can lift
And
every aspect of the Malru connection from the
yeah,
story, and it's exactly the
You
same
yeah,
wouldn't really
story.
lose
The plot
anything.
changes,
Yeah.
but the
but
story
it's
stays the
also
same. That's my issue with it.
but it's all good stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah, it
think
is all
this is
good
where
though.
it's crying out. It's all crying out for like that part of the story belongs in a middle book in a
Yeah,
trilogy. Where like
yeah.
the first bit doesn't have to do with this because this is where the book stops feeling I don't want to say it's never thought out. It's less thought out. This is
Mm.
where it feels like somebody read a first draft that had nothing to do with a lot of this, and they said, "Okay, um, we need to know what's going on back on Coruscant." Mace has a POV out of nowhere in the
Yeah.
middle of the book. Like Mace has got to go have a meeting with the Chancellor. Great meeting. Love everything that was said. Love the way it was said. Love everything there. Has really no reason to be in this book. The book feels less interested in what it's trying to, what the author's clearly invested in, which is the whole Malraux stuff.
Yeah.
But we keep taking breaks. It's time to go see what Anakin and Obi-Wan are doing and introduce them. What they're doing has nothing to do with this. You know, like nothing whatsoever. Which is point. They're finishing up that, and so they're free. So
Mm.
as a convenience, it also be just because uh, they're the only ones that really sell the message of like the jealousy thing for Sidious to make use of. Of course, they were doing something that had nothing to do with it, but sort of like by definition, you know, it has nothing to do with anything here. It doesn't belong all in one book, and so you have like this I love all the stuff of going through customs and like all the minutia
Mm.
of how hard it is trying to conceal the fact we're Jedi and we're being inspected here and prodded there, and somebody's calculating this and somebody's plotting that, and somebody's being informed here. And Obi-Wan and Anakin are dealing with a Jedi dissident who's like done with the whole council authority, has nothing to do with anything. But everything is good. It's the way that it's all stitched together. And to
Yeah.
me, I wouldn't summate it as oh, this Malraux thing, I don't care about it, or it could have
Yeah,
been
no, I didn't
anything.
mean to
It's
imply it to be
all of these
dismissive like
things are
that. Yeah,
that way. You know what I
it's
mean?
all
It's
great.
all of it. You
Yeah,
know?
I was
Yeah,
approaching from the structural aspect as well. It's the fact that the plot is not gelling with the
it's the
story in
structure.
the same way, and
Yeah,
and in particular as well, if this was an average Star Wars book, it would be completely fine. But because we've had
yeah.
such a rich and interconnected,
The first bit
textured
is so good.
first
Yeah,
third, it
mm,
stands
yeah,
out so starkly
It
when things
felt,
get stretched out a
yeah.
little bit. Because plot
mm,
wise, it's all brilliant, love it all, brilliant slice of life in particular. He does a really good job. We haven't mentioned it yet, but in terms of world building, he layers in so many different tiny details all throughout the story in terms of the different ways sentients are dealing with things, simple things like the refreshers, the
yeah,
toilets, having all the different appliances and things required for different
yeah.
species
The way
needs,
that that race like
food.
identifies the serial numbers of things
Yeah,
that are not clear
exactly.
to
Loads of little
other
things like that.
people. Yeah,
That's perhaps thickest here in this sequence, and he really kind
hmm
of lets you live in that world, and that's all brilliant. But because the actual story relevance is stretched out to just being mostly plot, and most of that is connected to the Malraux end of things, it doesn't feel as tightly woven and knitted in as the rest of the story. I think the fix, if there was going to be one fix within a single story, because obviously the natural conclusion is to stretch it out and make it a trilogy or a duology. I
yeah. That's
agree,
what I
that's
would
the
do.
main
Yeah,
thing. But if you put that
yeah,
aside
yeah.
and focus on one, I would lean heavier into the Palpatine angle from the earlier stage and have it be that the setup for this whole thing isn't necessarily planned by him, but we see him or hinted at him detecting the doubts in Dooku and then leaning into that more um, and not proactively basically into the story
I
so
would
that
have
we
had
see that
yeah.
everything with Anakin and Obi-Wan and the Padme situation and all that stuff, all of that ends up being more set up from the beginning as part of that Palpatine layer of this, because that's the only reason the Mace
I
conversation
think
happens. It's the only reason that Anakin and Obi-Wan involved, aside from contractual mandate. It's Palpatine. So if we just take that strand, tie it in and weave it as part of the Dooku
I think
situation,
the way
that works quite
the way
nicely.
to do that I
It
think
helped
the
to
way
make
to do that,
it more consistent.
I think, yeah, I think the way to do that would have been for Palpatine to, through intermediaries, like say the droid,
Yeah,
um,
exactly. Perfect example.
I would have had him be the one that kind of tempts Asajj into, because this whole thing, that's the other complication here. This isn't part of Dooku's plan.
Mm.
Asajj is taking the initiative, right? So when you think about how much page space this takes up, it's a long, long, long interconnected sequence of loosely connected scenes that are basically none of this is really supposed to be happening, and it's all done in order that there's the false death of Yoda for the
Hmm.
galaxy at large, and we that's really I don't want to say it feels pointless, but it's by far the least necessary part of the story, and it doesn't mean anything to the audience because at no point do we think that Yoda's dead.
Yeah, and
So
even in world,
it's
it's like
sort
a
of
day or two that it lasts as well,
yeah,
which is
Right.
it's
tried to be the
it's
point out of it, but it's not.
it's
It
a
doesn't
lot
it
of I
doesn't
mean
is
it's a lot of setup for stuff that really required an entire book to expand, and it's
Mm.
all done in one middle portion. And every concept and idea is pretty sound. It's just it's too rushed. And also at the end of this sequence, effectively, both J. Merrick and Max Leem die.
Yeah,
And
and
so it's
more
like
importantly, are cut out of the story. They don't just die in the
that's what I'm
plot;
saying.
their
Yeah, like
relevance
but so
goes.
much of the book, so much of the book is establishing them because they were built for this,
Mm.
and then they're done. You know, so it's like it does feel like he had like Sean Stewart had ideas that someone else came and said, no,
Yeah.
it wants to be two books or three. It really wants to be multiple books, but it hasn't got that, and you feel it. You feel it kind not again. It doesn't completely fall apart, but you sense it because there, like I said, there was for the longest time I thought this book is like perfect. I have no notes,
Mm.
and then the notes kept on coming, and then it was like, but I feel like it wasn't his fault. I feel like
Yeah,
he,
I
if you
agree.
asked him,
I
do
would
you want to tell
struggle
this in
to
three stories
see.
or one? He would
Yeah,
have said three.
I could
You know,
struggle to see how. It may even be why he didn't come back for another Star Wars story. To be honest, it might help
mm,
explain some of that
possibly.
because I don't see how
could
someone
be.
who can
Yeah.
write the story that we got in the first third of this and then
Yeah,
also have it
Just
unravel
wouldn't
so
come back
rapidly
for
into the
any.
again, still fantastic, still
Yeah.
good, still landing all of the high beat moments, and the character stuff is all brilliant. But just the balance of and interwoven nature of the story and plot is just coming unraveled by the end. In this
Mhm.
context alone, just the fact that the whole plan is Ventress, his whole initiative thing, never gets dealt
yeah,
with. Like she just
Yeah.
almost balls up the whole plan for Dooku, whether he's doing it earnestly or whether he's doing it as a Sith manipulation. She nearly balls it up, and it just doesn't get properly addressed. It's just oh well, she's back, and no punishment really for having done all of this, etc. And
I mean,
the bigger
it
problem for
stops
me
just
is that
short of it though. They built up
Yeah.
even the reaction he could have had to it. It just
yeah,
didn't really go
They,
that
they,
far because the scene he
yeah.
has with Sidious touches on exactly that.
yeah, it
And
just
Sidious
fizzles
basically
out
tells him you have
in
to
the
kill her.
interplay.
You
Yeah,
know?
Yeah.
and all
It's
the characters that
yeah.
we've lost. We lost uh Marek and
Max
Liam,
Leem.
right? Max Liam, I was going to
Yeah,
say Pax earlier. Max Liam
yeah. I know
and
what you mean.
Marek.
It's
Um,
easy to mistake.
Yeah.
we've lost them now, and that's fine. You know, in a larger story, we'd keep them for longer. But if they have to be cut off here, and it's dramatic, and sometimes life gets in the way that way, that's part of the message. That's fine. But we don't have a story connection to them after this point. We don't have
Right.
the resolution
Yeah.
between we and Scout. When we has a weird out of character moment that's happening because of the Force, it's a big like spike of out of characterness that just happens and then goes
Yeah.
away immediately. There's no.
Yeah.
hmm
I would have had it be that Scout takes a lesson from Liam and reteaches him it as the
Yeah.
moment there, or
That
Marek
would be
coming in,
great.
you know,
Yeah.
just something to help give
Because
that
the
relevance of the characters in
Especially
that middle
since
point and early point and tying it
yeah.
into the finale because they just don't have anything to do with anything. They may as well not
because
have
I
been
really like
involved, and that's
I,
a flaw.
I
That would
really
be
like
poignant too if we had a moment with Merrick too. It would have been nice
yes.
to have them
Yeah.
Yes,
each take lessons
Yeah.
from their prospective teachers and weave that in later.
yeah,
And I really like their death scene. It's great. It's
it's
just it's
brilliant.
Yeah.
not it's
We should
too early in the
establish
book
that
and it doesn't
they're
have
killed
anything
by
to do with
Ventress.
what goes on later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
They're
it's all
killed by
that connective
Ventress.
tissue. It just
And
lapses.
also,
Yeah.
I would like to before we move on to because we'll probably want to start moving into the final portion of the book soon. But before we get there, I want to highlight. I don't know how in depth we want to go, but two things. I really love that conversation in the gym with Guy
Mm.
Merrick and we. That's great, a great scene. And the other thing, I love Asajj's speech about like what it is to the truth, as she calls it, like
Yeah,
as she sees it,
it's
it's the
a truth.
sincerity.
That's
It's
the
not
beautiful
about
thing about it. It's
yeah,
a
it's
truth. It's
a truth.
genuine,
It's a
but it's not
version of the truth.
the
It's
truth.
her
Yeah.
truth. She yeah, it's also the story she lived. She's not
Mm.
lying. She's just saying this is what this is the galaxy, the world as I see it. and it's the path you're walking. You know, it's if anything, it's like a warning. It's almost like, I think you're wasting your time. And if you
Yeah,
want to stop, all you have to do is do what I do. It's honest. It's the sincerity behind everything. And to write that way with that many different perspectives, all these things are like amazing. I love these scenes. It's the way that all this stuff is woven together in that portion of the book
yeah.
where you just feel it wanting to be
More of
something
it.
else.
A truth was the one word. It's her truth. That's the way to phrase that. That's her truth, and in story and character, and it beautifully plays out in
Yeah.
philosophy. Again, all of the different layers are mixed so perfectly in
I
these
think it's the
moments. He's a
best
master of
written
that.
scene that involves her in anything I've
Yeah,
been through. Like
no
I can't
question.
think yeah, I can't think of anything that really rivals it.
Merrick's, his sort of thing comes full circle in the sense of like him, in his conversation with Ventress, he kind
Yeah.
of briefly kind of has this little touch of the dark side where he gets angry about like him wanting to prove himself and see like, oh, this time I can actually win. But his realization of the fact that no matter what he does in any capacity, whether it be physical, swordsmanship or just, force ability, he just cannot defeat her, which, briefly drives him, kind of touching the dark side a little bit, but it's then you know that sequence with MacLeod just kind of like sensing him even as she's dying, like his conflict and kind of just being like, no, don't do this, don't, where this leads to, don't do this, and him taking that in, registering it, and going through, he basically goes through like all the stages of
Yeah,
grief in a sense, like he just kind of accepts like, no, I am not gonna do this. I'm gonna die a Jedi,
yeah,
touch the
It's a
light.
book in
And
a moment. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
it,
It
it
really
really
is.
is.
it's an
Beautiful
entire
sequence.
story in a moment, and
Yeah,
it's
And I
beautifully
even I
written. Yeah,
yeah. And I even like how in the last moments it even describes how once he's reached full just acceptance and, coalescence in the Force, it describes the fact that even though Ventress did cut him down, in the last few seconds he fought more beautifully than he ever had in his entire life, and, even was
and
smiling
he
at the
was
end.
smiling. Yeah, and
yeah.
he was
It's
smiling.
it's
Those.
beautifully done, which then leads into, because that's another thing too, like him not really smiling much is kind of something that's brought up earlier in the book as well, and him really kind of
Mm,
reaching like everything, even though like we have our issues with this sequence, the sequence in and of itself is absolutely beautiful, which then leads to him saying goodbye to Scout as he's dying, and literally like his last words of like, like when she's like, don't leave me, and then he's like, never, my Padawan, and just
They're
acknowledging her
really,
even at the end.
yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
oh, like you feel it like so
yeah,
much
Yeah, I
so.
mean, it's very
the two.
emotional and it's all great. Yeah, I mean, and there's and as you're saying this, I'm realizing I don't dislike any scene. It's
Mm,
the weaving of
Mhm.
it all.
yeah,
Every scene
Yeah,
is great. Like every scene is at bare minimum good. You know what I mean? But these scenes are fantastic. They just want to be in another book
yeah.
desperately.
A
You know?
yeah,
longer story. They're worthy of one, basically. But you
Yes.
highlighted the 2 points that I
absolutely.
want to focus on there, or wanted to raise. The fact that he fought the most beautiful fight he ever had, beautiful. The fact that he was smiling, and then you said it as well. He died a Jedi. That's all you need to know about that. He died a Jedi, and that is beautiful and ties into what really is the meat of this entire sequence, is because this is all basically just set up for what comes after in terms of tying it back to Yoda and the Padawan. Um, the grieving scene, the moment
Hmm.
where Yoda manages to
Leads us
pass on the
back
wisdom
free
of
essentially.
ages through action, through dialogue, through philosophy, through everything, for experience and experiences of the masters themselves, just sharing that nice simple plain meal, and just grieving together, and having them play out their emotions, play out their ideas and their approaches to what they're feeling about their philosophies and what they're feeling about their life lessons, and what they've been taught up to this point, and how it's challenged by the reality of the world that they're now facing, and him just sort of calmly accepting, but also firmly stating, that you have a choice. You can
Hmm.
react to this. Yeah, let it happen. Let yourself feel it. Don't become robot detached like so many people interpret the Jedi to be. Let yourself feel, but then
How they're
take
portrayed.
control. Yeah, how they're portrayed exactly. Take control.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to imply that people get it wrong. They're
Yeah.
absolutely
No,
portrayed
no.
that way
Yeah,
in most
yeah,
other things.
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
but this is the truth to me of what the Jedi are supposed to be, and we see it in the hints and layers of what we see in the original trilogy, and we see it established in stories like this. This is them taking their emotions, feeling them, but choosing to
Hmm.
take that next step in the direction of good, in direction of
Yeah.
health and happiness, and prosperity. It's
And
hard to put into it. The scene does it better than I ever could. It's just
yeah,
live
what
it, live the
yeah,
scene.
Basically,
what I
just read
absolutely
it
adore.
because I think we're
Yeah,
Yeah,
cheapening it a little bit.
we
Just
no,
the
we
really
are.
obvious
are.
part,
I just
Yeah.
it's yeah,
Um,
like but one thing I will say, like before we move on, because like I said, just read the sequence. Like
It's
it
beautiful.
explains itself. I just adore how it doesn't come off like he's not denying, the bits of truth in what they're saying. Like, yeah, there's darkness everywhere. It's all around us. It's a cold universe, but you can choose to go
he
along with
says
it,
it.
or you can be a light. But
Mm,
He also is going to
regardless,
say it to
you have to
Dooku at
choose.
the
Like
end. So yeah.
yeah,
you can't like waffle in between. You either choose to be good or not. And you can do that, but I'm fine where I'm at. And it just goes back to like the perspective, maturity, and how both generations can bring up good points, but the reality of the situation, like you were saying, Callan, at the end of the day, Jedis, they feel, but they also choose to, accept, be better, and move on, which is just beautifully encapsulated in that sequence. Seriously, just read it. That's all we have to say.
it's a life
Yeah.
lesson in a scene, and
But
I absolutely love it.
then so the actual events of Vjun, I think we can kind of truncate down to like the bits that really like matter. You had mentioned like the wacko playing with the skeleton moment, like
Yeah, a weird
obliquely, I
out of
think.
character moment didn't need
You
to
don't
be
really
there.
need.
Needed
Yeah,
needed
There
more
is,
time to
yeah.
breathe. Needed
yeah,
more of a confrontation
yeah.
between the two. That's
There's
all we
Do
there's
you
all
needed.
want
these
to?
things.
Yeah. Do
I
you
was
want to
gonna
do
say all
Scout
these.
first before because that one's shorter
Yeah,
with
go ahead.
Ventress? Or
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, it's honestly not like that depth. Like, they go in there after having their experiences in they've split up at this point, by the way. The Padawans are separate from Yoda. Yoda goes up to the top of the castle to meet with Dooku, while the two of them are both in the lower catacombs. This is where which eventually sort of comes to them encountering Asajj Ventress, who actually, having seen the conflict that the two were experiencing before, actually kind of threatens to kill Scout with like a force choke. Like she's, has her in her grasp, and she basically offers we like a choice in the sense of the sequence is a little odd in certain aspects in terms of the writing. Like she's trying to tempt we because she sees the sort of conflict that he's going through. But what I love about the sequence too, like so much in the book, is it turns the cliche completely on its head. Because it's set up like, oh, is he conflicted? Is he gonna make the sequence? Is Scout gonna? It's like, nah, he's good with being good. I've learned that lesson at this point. And Ventress, I love how quickly Ventress's whole demeanor is instantly turned around by Wee's choice to not accept her offer, and for him and Scout to actually fight back, even though they are outmatched. Like she goes from being in control to being like, what, but you, sort of thing. And that's just such a good encapsulation of where Ventress is at this stage too, especially that everything that's been built up into this point. And it's a good way of highlighting where Scout and we have come from since the beginning of the book, the maturity and the experience they've had, and the security they feel in their sense of wanting to be good at the end of the day, regardless of whatever situation that might land them in.
Personally, for me, I
Yeah.
felt that this scene suffered more than any other, and on the Padawan side of things, for the lack of that. Again, what we've been saying, the length of story. Like, if this felt like this
Yeah.
was the biggest cost of the rushed finale, because aside from the joyous kind of like, oh, we're fine from Scout, which I liked that the kind of pulling of the rug there, the fact that, oh, this isn't actually all that dramatic, guys. This is, we're going to be okay. I kind of liked that, but the moment, I feel like you could have earned that better. It could have had more meaning. It could have been the larger scene could have been a better setup and backdrop for it. This isn't what I remember the book for in any way, shape, or form, basically. And it could have been. I think it could
No,
have been the
this
perfect
the
bookend to a
when
larger
Yeah.
you
story if it
think
had
of
the
the
time for
cliche
it.
about journey and not the destination, this book
Yeah,
is like it's the journey. So because it is a rushed ending, it just is.
yeah,
Everything outside of like the Yoda Dooku confrontation, which is pretty perfect, is it's a result of having to wash things down or squish stuff in that wouldn't. The book wants to be longer,
yeah,
as I keep saying, or
Mhm.
spread out over other things. Because and I always remember the Anakin and Obi-Wan stuff, just feeling like, why are they here?
Mm,
But when I look back at it now, the solution is not take them out. It's make this story big, like
yeah.
really big, like 2 or 3 books big, because everything deserves that. But anyway, that's kind of why I'm driving it in the direction of trying to just
that's
focus on
okay.
the
We
Yoda
we
Dooku
can
thing, because
Yeah,
we can move from that now.
any
anyone has any
all of the complaints boil down to crushed ending at this
Yeah.
point, but
Yeah,
this stuff doesn't suffer for it.
yeah,
So yeah.
we
So
do agree to
the
that.
Callan, you've been wanting to do this since you
Give
had
me
your
my
old
rose,
haircut.
Matthew. Give me my
Yeah, give me
rose.
my rose. Tell us about it. Like,
Yes.
talk to
To
me,
be perfectly
man.
honest, and I knew this at the time, but perhaps not as much as I should have done. The "Give me my rose" part really isn't even the point. Like, I use that line because it is such a beautiful
Yeah.
truncation of the whole mission statement of this book. But so much of this book's scenes and interplays and character interactions and everything, the moments that this so artfully captures are better than just "Give me my rose." But for this scene and for the kind of capstone gem of it, that is what this boils down to. Yoda does not want anything that the dark side can give him, and Dooku is not understanding that. The misalignment between him, because one thing that's made clear throughout the story, and to be fair, in most lore, Dooku does not have a particular issue with the Jedi or the Order. He has an issue with the Republic and the thing that the Jedi, the monolith that the Jedi now has to serve, and the lack of good that it's doing. And he has a point, which is one of the things that makes Dooku work when he's written well. But even in that framing, he doesn't fully understand, and it goes back to that kind of I've always found everything really easy that we talked about earlier. The fact that he's never truly struggled, even with the powerful lesson in humility he was given by Yoda. He's never truly kind of gotten the core of what it is to be a Jedi, in the sense that it's hard to put into words. The Jedidom is not something that can be in any way connected to power. It makes clear to start the story. Scout is a better Jedi than Dooku in many, many ways. And that is what the story is trying to say. And this is what Yoda is trying to explain in a way that Dooku can process. And again, it's one of those situations where you kind of have to go and read the scene. It to me,
Yeah,
it so perfectly plays between the generational questions, the teacher, mentor, student questions, the power versus selflessness questions, all of that stuff. It's steeped in it from every line.
The thing I will say that I like how, in contrast to the rest of the rest conclusions, conclusions in the multiple, right? That are not quite right. This one feels completely built up to, and it's not just through going back to the start of the book where we're looking at like their personal relationship and the flashbacks to that. Every relationship between the characters who matter um, builds up into this, down to the fact that when we was talking to Jai, he was asking him, if a Jedi, he didn't say if I did, but he says, if a Jedi went bad, would you put him down? He's like, well, yeah, I would, because you're like a unchecked sort of force that's going to be like a net loss for pretty much everyone you ever stumble into from that point on, which isn't quite the same thing as saying once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. That's a truism. It's not true at all, clearly.
Mm,
Otherwise, Yoda wouldn't be doing this entire adventure if he actually believed that, right? So there is this sort of, that's what tends to happen, and you have to be prepared to stand against it. And it's also, there's a difference between a murder and a killing, and there's also a difference between uh like an execution and a mercy killing as well. So, but Asajj makes the point of comparing. She talks about indoctrination. She's like, you're not fully indoctrinated yet. Dooku is somebody who would think that that's what the Jedi really are. I mean, they indoctrinate you into being that way. He can't quite comprehend that this is just part of someone else's nature, not to crave, not to want, not to. I mean, Yoda has to spell out, as you said,
hmm
I don't need money, and I have power, and I don't need
I've
to
got a
exercise it.
palace as well.
Yeah,
Just
I know.
armies.
Yeah, I live
What
in
do
a
you have
castle
that I
bigger than
don't?
yours. Yeah.
Even at the
yeah.
literal level, stepping
And,
outside the figurative,
but
he's got a
that's
point.
and
It's so
that
strong.
and the
Yeah.
great thing about that, the word that we haven't talked about, it's not that he's like winning here.
Mm.
It's the boredom
Oh
hmm
yeah,
of like how many times
Has he
like
heard
not
this?
from you necessarily, but like from how many. I mean, there isn't one of these under the sun. I've had all these 10,000 times before you were born,
yeah. Did
and
not
they
come
don't
here
mean
for
anything to
ideology.
me.
Give
And
me your
He's heard this
truth.
all
I
I thought you
loved
were
that.
better than this, kind
Yeah.
of a thing. I mean,
This is
tell
what
me what I
turned
don't
you.
know.
He even
Yeah,
brings up Sora Bulk in this sequence, like saying like, "I'm not Sora Bulk. Tell me something I haven't heard."
Yeah,
You
again,
know.
another
yeah,
little nod to the comics and the outside stories that
yeah,
this era was good for. But yeah, but he literally asked, like, please, Dooku, turn me to the dark side so I can
yeah,
understand.
hmm
And obviously, he has no chance. So, but
hmm
yeah.
we see a flicker. We see a flicker
hmm
of the glamour drop.
because
Oh, no, that's the wrong word.
in
It's
this
not glamour
sequence,
dropping. Glamour rising, I should
no,
say.
Dooku gets like gradually like more and more frustrated as Yoda like either shoots down or just equals each of his proposals to the point where he's just like, feel like I like be angry about that. Like, you
Yes.
said the universe is unfair, feel something, for once in your life. Like he doesn't say this, but he's basically like, just stop pretending for once in your life and actually, and that's when we finally get the sequence that Callan, because we actually
And
do
that's
see huh?
and Scout was trying to get rises in the same language, like
Yeah,
Yeah.
earlier in the book. So like all those conversations build up into this, and it's
crescendo.
just it's a crescendo, yeah, and it's a masterstroke of writing. This entire
Mm.
scene is just perfect, like perfect.
Mhm.
Um, and then again, like this is why I am not quite sold on the whole just the jealousy thing. That's effectively only there to make the Anakin and Obi-Wan interference as powerful as it is a force for
Yeah.
Dooku. That's
Right.
the only reason it's there. Yeah,
It's
otherwise, it's a
really
complete.
irritating because obviously
Right.
you know it's going to
Yeah,
happen. You know it can't change. But the power of the
yeah.
scene is that you so want him to turn. You want Dooku to
Mhm.
be brought back into the fold. And not
Hmm.
just for the sake of, well, wouldn't that be better for the universe? But you at this point in the story, you've come to care about the character at that level. Not in like a soft, we love Dooku, but just there is something here worth saving. And
Mhm.
Yoda, we have seen from everything built up to this point, is the one to do it. And
It's
it just
it
comes to a crash.
yeah. It's great because it's like you do get the sense like this is a real conflict that he's going through, and you could very much see that like you do have a choice right now. You do,
Yeah.
and you can follow it through. Like this isn't Dooku pretending. This isn't Yoda pretending.
He
This
said,
isn't an this isn't an offer made out of like spite or deception or anything like that. Like you truly, it does come off very much like I mean, you can almost compare it to like, Vader's sequences in Return of the Jedi when Luke is begging for his help and him looking at him and the Emperor and choosing to, you know, uh, betray
it's
Palpatine in that moment. It comes off, it's
it's
similar
it's the
levels of
game.
impact.
It's the game of push feather, and just
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
before, Yoda won before he got here. Like he
Yeah.
because it's I knew what this is going to be. Like it's the same excuses. The language doesn't change. I mean, I love the way he says the universe annihilates itself and
Yeah.
starts again every day, because
yeah,
it gets to
Every
a point.
moment. Yeah. It's
Like
amazing.
it gets to a point where Dooku is saying, "Well, I've done too much. I can't come back." And it's like, well, if I thought that, I wouldn't be here. Like, and that's like that's the
exactly.
scale of it. It's like as you corrected me, like it annihilates itself every moment and starts again. So it's like Dooku. There was a chance there, and without the Obi-Wan Anakin
Who
slinging their
knows?
way
Debate.
into it,
Yeah.
could have gone. But it's like it's written in such a way you can buy that it really had a chance. I don't think I read this book before Revenge of the Sith came out. I had read Shatterpoint first, which I think is one of the few that's arguably better than this and certainly darker. But this book is fairly dark, but
Mm.
I'm especially considering who it's being written for, like the young readership. Um, but I had read Shatterpoint, and shortly after Revenge of the Sith came out, I had read that, and that was the book that really put Dooku on the map as a character for me. I never really felt for him in the same way until I read this one, which was probably a year or two later. I mean, this just feels so earned to me in terms of like I kind of wanted that to work, and at the same time, I don't. It's great that it
Yeah.
doesn't. That's the
It's
point, is that it
drama.
doesn't.
Yeah. It's a
Right.
But
tragedy of
it,
it.
but it gets you wanting it.
Yeah.
Um,
You can see it as a possibility, and the fact that it can
yeah,
do that, just such a amazing point in the favor,
for what's
excuse me,
effectively a
in favor
prequel
of the
to one of the
yeah,
prequels.
and
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
essentially in the favor of the writing too, like the fact that you
Mhm.
can accomplish this and make it actually believable, even though you fully know that this is not going to work out for whatever reason. And despite our complaints with the ending in and of itself, although the landing doesn't stick in certain respects, and others it really does. And that's also kind of, you see the juxtaposition too, because as much as you see a flicker of light go through Dooku, we see a flicker of darkness go through Yoda, and having that
Yeah.
juxtaposition as well,
And how
because
intentional that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, like the little back and forth with that, and you get to see like what a hypothetical Yoda on the dark side would be like, and the realization that Dooku has from that, like,
I love the
oh,
description
like,
of like
yeah.
because they're talking about the lightsabers and how there's a red fire and a green, and the green burned
Mm.
hotter. Like I mean, there's such a like a I don't know. Like,
There's
I mean,
feeling here.
artistic,
The whole
just
argument of you're not
yeah,
feeling
yeah,
Yoda is like, no, he's feeling. Look at it from
yeah.
in the
very much
poetry of this
so.
moment. It's very powerful.
I think Matthew Stover might be the only one who writes this kind of thing like at the same level or better for me, like in terms of because the point is not all the minutia of the fight. It's
Yeah.
it's the character and the emotionality and the action in this book. Stover can get quite like long-winded with his action, but I don't like long-winded action, but I like his.
Mm.
This is really what I want action to be, though. I like it's fairly condensed down. It's simple, but it's got that poetic flair, as you just
It's
said,
all
Phil.
Yeah,
intention and commitment
because
and character choices.
yeah,
Yeah.
It does play out reasonably long. It's not too much shorter than the average Star Wars action,
Hmm.
with the obvious exceptions of the
hmm
big moments. But every beat is character perspective. It's decision making. It's why am I doing that? What if I'm doing this? What does it represent? How it is attached to the theme?
you.
It's really really well
Mhm.
done. I loved every
And
Yeah.
moment.
even little subtle touches like they talk about like Yoda breathing hard or Dooku like clenching his like jaw so tightly that it's like it's like turning white or the sweat going down their faces as they put counter and riposte against their blows. Like you really feel the weight of this conflict because they're fighting each other not just on a physical level, but this is also just an encapsulation of all the emotions just boiling over into everything at this point because they also make a point of saying that like Dooku is actively like drawing on the dark side around him in Vjun to just make him into this, and he's also letting out all the frustration for the sequence that just happened. So on top of that, like it comes off as like a real clash of just elemental forces at this point, both from an emotional and a physical front. So again, like we said, even though it's a relatively brief sequences, but the fact that they can hammer in so much is just
Yeah.
again just another strength of the writing as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
We could stay here all day discussing
We
about
really
it if
could.
we really wanted to, I think. But I mean,
uh,
it's like I love
Dooku,
it, you
Dooku
know.
triggers a missile and to go towards
yeah.
the
Yeah,
castle, and
classic
Yoda,
bad guy. I gotta
Yeah.
get
Oh,
away,
throw the old lady
self-destruct.
out the
Yeah,
window.
he just has a
yeah,
button that can
yeah,
do that with a
yeah.
missile on hand, I
Yeah,
guess.
That's what I want to the point. That's the last
borders
thing I
on
want.
the
We've
absurd.
we've criticized the overall structure
Yeah.
unraveling by the end in the plot terms,
Hmm.
and obviously we've said that isn't true of the character work. That's all still just as strong as it is throughout the entirety of the story. And I want to hammer in that as the last point. For all of the flaws
Hmm.
this finale has, it's pure plot. Like the undermining is
Yeah.
from the necessary involvement of Anakin and Obi-Wan in the short time they had to tell that. If the story was longer, that wouldn't be a problem. And even though it isn't for whatever reason in this, it does not impact the true finale of the character piece. The character
Right.
story finishes perfectly. It's just the
I
plot
mean,
that gets the unraveling to where it does that
Yeah.
ends up feeling like it's
yeah,
rushed and weak. That's
the
basically it.
book ends on Padme
Yeah,
for no
I was
reason
gonna say, why is
whatsoever.
it
You know what I mean?
Padme's
Like
perspective?
Kind of
Their
random.
she's
home
in
is like,
two
what has that got
scenes.
to do?
The very
she's in
beginning and the
two
very end.
She's
scenes.
Cersei
Yeah.
yearning out of a window the entire time. It's just stupid.
But only for two scenes. I forgot she even had a POV until the very end, and then it's like, and she's there to see the ship land, and some little people come out, and
Yeah,
Anakin's there. She don't care about that.
because
You
Yeah,
know what I mean? I guess
because
I
it's
guess
from
it's like
the very beginning. Yeah.
you could
yeah.
construe it that she's glad that like Yoda's back. When at first there was a time when she would have thought he was dead. But it really just feels like she's glad that Anakin's here. Like which of
Yeah.
course she is.
Fetch my
And that's fine.
finest dress.
Fair
Yeah,
play
I
to her.
must look
Of
beautiful.
course she
Is
would
this
be. But why the hell are we caring about that in this
Of all
book? Like, you
things,
know what I
exactly in
mean?
this story?
like
Yeah.
you could have ended the sequence with you should have ended it like with Dooku on the beach with the shell. Like
Yes,
that.
Yeah,
yes,
If he
that
or
should
cut
have
back to
been the
Yoda
end of
arriving back at the temple, and lighting a candle or
yeah.
something. Just
yeah, one of the two.
something
Yeah.
to juxtapose the fact that this is their
Oh,
story.
that would have been so good though. I mean, it should have ended on Dooku.
Oh
That
yeah,
should
no,
have
yeah,
like
I
I mean
agree.
like
Yeah,
that would
That's
have been great.
yeah.
Like
It's
yeah.
written very
Either
much
or just
like
wait
the
together.
ending. Which speaking of Anakin, we also get this like very quick sequence where like they meet up and like sees Anakin's like
Yeah.
like you're not gonna kill me, and he hugs him, and it's like
Right.
Give it time. Give it a
and
few
it's
more
like oh
years.
you think about it, it's like oh like
And that's
that
I
If
love
we
how
just
that
had a little
works
bit more
because
clarity, he could have saved a lot of lives with that
yeah,
vision.
yeah, sure.
oh
Well,
god
but if the Jedi
Palpatine
were
shrouding it.
portrayed a little bit with more clarity throughout, they wouldn't
Uh,
have run into that
it's
problem.
Sidious,
But
Matt. Sidious is
yeah,
all just clouding everything always.
no, it's
yeah
bad writing also. It's like it's not all Sidious's fault. It's the Jedi are
yeah
like portrayed badly most of the
Oh
time.
God.
But I mean
but
But this is
but
not
yeah, I
that.
mean
That's
because we
ultimately
don't
what the
want to
story
end.
is. This is
No, yeah,
not
we
that.
don't want to end on that. This is the perfect portrayal, not just of Yoda, but for me, like Jedi ness. I love the Jedi in this. I usually have notes for the Jedi. Like I like the Jedi. I'll take the Jedi over the Sith any day. I'm not trying to say the Jedi are equally bad with the Sith. Hell no. But they're often boring, and they're often written as though they have less emotion, like emotionality going on than like Vulcans in Star Trek. And this is so like this is how you can have them be as Lucas wrote them, as Lucas intended them, I guess, if you want to go that far. Although I think his vision was ever changing, and sometimes he's lying about when
Mhm.
thoughts came to him, quite frankly. But you can tell a story within those sort of parameters and still make them glorious characters. This is how to do it. Like this is it. And there were far too few works of this quality all throughout, but especially for like the Clone Wars period. I love this book. I was
Yeah,
gonna say it was for the longest time I thought it was gonna be like a 5 star if I was doing this on like Goodreads or something. If I was giving it a review, I'd probably take down a full star just because the structural problems are that much of a this is weird, and it so clearly, so easily could be better with another entry, just one other book. But I think it really wants to be like a series on its own.
Mm.
But it could have so easily been 5 star material. I like it like a 5 star. I like it like a 6 out of 5.
Likewise.
But it
yeah.
is a bit, it is a bit wonky, and like objectively
It's the
speaking,
structure that really drags it down, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It has the ingredients of like a borderline like perfect Star Wars novel. It's mainly just the structural and the presentation, particularly in like the second and third act, that kind of
yeah.
drags it down
Mm.
for us overall.
I,
I agree with your point. Like it's definitely like it's a 5 or 6 star book, but in terms
I,
of enjoyment,
I
but a 4 in terms of
like.
actual structure, which is also why even though this is a top 10 book for me, I don't know if I would necessarily say it's my favorite Clone Wars book. I'd actually think I might put Shatterpoint like a notch
I
above.
was gonna say,
But for different
that's
reasons.
the one I'm in contention with. I
Yeah,
might like this more than Shatterpoint. I'd have to think about it, but I definitely think Shatterpoint indisputably is better written, just better formulated. I don't want to blame this on the writer because the writing quality was so fucking good. I feel like this required
mhm,
interference for why it is
Yeah.
the way it is. I'm sure
Agreed.
somebody did this to him, or like a committee
right.
did. But yeah, in terms of the finished product, I think Shatterpoint is better made.
I
I
think
think I like this more.
yeah, for me it's
I love this.
yeah. For me it's like Shatterpoint, like you could open that book in like any of the acts and still find some like really compelling, scenes and story and narrative, whereas this one it really shines brightest in the
Mhm.
first, whereas even though the other two acts are great with some great sequences, they don't the lack of it's less consistent, which is kind of what drags it down. So
For
again, that's
sure.
also why I put it like again, still a top 10 book for me, but I would put Shatterpoint a bit over this. But again, like that, I mean, when that's what you have to compare it to, that I think that says a lot.
Yeah,
We'll
for sure.
definitely have to get to Shatterpoint in the near future, and
Yeah.
actually mean it this
It'll be a
time.
couple
So
of months though. Like, let's be real. Like, but
yeah, yeah,
we do want to do it.
regardless,
But
it'll be
it's
a
like,
few
let's just
months
make
Do
sure
before
we?
we
they
can
Yeah.
get to it.
understand.
Yeah,
Like, it's gonna be a few months, folks.
yeah,
Do,
but we
yeah.
are on a bit of a
But
Star
this is
Wars
still
kick
like
for the first time in many a year, so
absolutely.
there will
Hmm.
be more
This,
content of
this,
some kind coming.
yeah. Yeah, this is
Um,
still an absolute masterpiece and one of the best. Like, if you're a fan, like, not even if you're not, you don't have to be a fan of Yoda. You don't have to be a fan of Dooku to get something out of this. Just the literary elements. It's one of the best looks at the Jedi. Outside of very few, like honestly, in my opinion, outside of like some NJO stuff. Like this is just
Yeah,
peak right here, and it has something for everybody. Again, just from a literary element, from a entertainment element but mostly from a character element. Like the character study is what really makes this book for us, and I think it will for a lot of people. Despite some of the structural flaws, it is still just a fantastic look all around. And
yeah,
honestly, it feeds a lot of desires that fan you might have. Like say if you are a fan of Dooku but want to look in more of his origin explored, this is perfect. If you want to see Yoda's perspective outside of what we see in the films, with some of his more galaxy-wide impact moments. Again, this is perfect. Like it has something for everybody. And even if you're just a general fan of the Jedi and just want to see the structure of how they operate, outside of how they are typically portrayed, if you want to see the inner workings, again, like this is perfect. It has something to scratch a lot of particular needs, and despite being such a simple story, it really does hit on so many amazing levels, which is keeps it with that staying power for all of us, which has made this revisit just so amazing, I think.
yeah. I don't have much to add to that. I think that was perfectly said. I will say that I think, um, I didn't. I obviously was already like pretty much an adult when the Clone Wars show came out. I understand on some level just how popular the character of Ahsoka Tano is. When I think of similar characters or that could fit the bill, I think of Scout first because, like, I mean, I love Scout, and I think if you told the Clone Wars and just inserted her instead of Ahsoka, she'd have the same or maybe even a wider range of appeal because of her limitations. I just think she's such a powerful character, and I wish we had seen more of her. It's like an incredible debut, and kind of pretty much the end of her for the most part.
Yeah.
But
She
other than that, I can't add to what you just said. I love this book, like warts and all.
No
Mhm.
arguments from me on either of the all cases. Agreed on all. It's one of my favorite. I probably is my single favorite Star Wars book of all time, but I'd have to examine that a bit more critically with some of the other books we're going to be going into soon. Yeah, read this book. Basically, that's what I'll sum this
Yeah,
up with. Read this book.
and
Everything I
then
endeavor.
described about its quality, you will gain more reading it than anything you could have listening from us. So this is
And
basically
if
going
you
to waste a lot of
disagree
time.
with us, just stop. Just go away. I don't want to hear it. I really don't. This book is amazing.
Yeah,
I don't want to hear
you can learn
any
some
what's
life
that,
lessons from this book, and
Yeah,
that's what higher praise can there be for any piece of art,
yeah.
So, but yeah, this has been our analysis of Yoda Dark Rendezvous. We will hopefully be returning for some more Star Wars material shortly, relative to
Mhm.
us, a few months, scattered
Relatively
throughout.
shortly.
Yeah,
Relatively
relatively
shortly.
shortly
But
for us. We will have some more content out, as well as with any content besides Star Wars as well. But yeah, either way, more to come. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you enjoy what is going to be coming, and we'll see you next time. I am Callan, and I still don't have an outro.
oh yeah, that's a joke we used to do decades ago. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one. Bye bye.
Evanova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.